Nia Jackson stands in Hollow Pines' stifling courtroom, sweat slicking her neck, as Judge Harold Crane bangs his gavel, sentencing her to 10 years for an assault she never committed, his icy stare cutting through her while the all-white jury snickers. She rises, voice calm, and declares she's a U.S. attorney, sparking gasps and chaos. Crane scoffs, ordering her cuffed, but a juror shrieks. A gun flashes in the gallery. This clash will haunt Nia's future, but who pulled the trigger? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe, because tomorrow's explosive episode is one you can't miss. Nia Jackson gripped the steering wheel of her sleek black SUV, the late afternoon sun scorching the cracked pavement of Hollow Pines' only gas station, a squat concrete box perched on the edge of this crumbling Georgia town. She was 37, a U.S. attorney with a razor-sharp mind and a reputation for dismantling corrupt syndicates from Atlanta to D.C. But today she was just a daughter driving 300 miles south to visit her aging father, Samuel, who'd retired to this forgotten speck after a stroke stole half his strength 6 months ago. Dust kicked up behind her tires as she rolled into the lot, the air thick with the tang of gasoline and rotting pine from the brittle woods stretching beyond the horizon. Her GPS chirped 20 minutes to his trailer, a tin-roofed relic he'd bought cheap off a foreclosure list, and she exhaled, adjusting her sunglasses against the glare bouncing off the rusted pumps. Her short braids brushed her shoulders as she stretched her neck, cramped from hours on I-95, and she glanced at the fuel gauge hovering just above empty. Hollow Pines wasn't her scene. Too small, too steeped in a past that clung like damp rot. But Samuel had begged her to come, his voice crackling over the phone with a frailty that twisted her gut. Family was family, and she'd promised him a weekend away from the grind of federal cases, a chance to sit on his sagging porch and sip sweet tea like they used to when she was a kid, dreaming of law school. She eased the SUV beside Pump 3, the gravel crunching under her wheels, and killed the engine, the silence swallowing the hum of the highway she'd left 30 miles back. The station was a grimy shell, its windows smeared with years of neglect, the faded sign overhead reading Holt's Fuel in chipped red letters that peeled like sunburned skin. Nia stepped out, her polished black heels clicking sharp against the uneven ground, her navy blazer tailored snug over her lean frame, a stark contrast to the faded denim and grease stains of this backwater pit. She slung her purse over one shoulder, smoothing the fabric of her slacks, and took a steadying breath, the heat pressing down like a fist. She'd fill up, grab a bottle of water, and be at Samuel's before dusk painted the sky purple. Simple enough, she thought, until her eyes caught movement near the station's splintered wooden bench, where 2 white men lounged, their styrofoam cups sweating in the humidity, their faded caps tilted back to reveal weathered faces etched with boredom and something darker. The bigger one, a bear of a man with a scruffy beard and a gut spilling over his belt, nudged his wiry companion, whose sunken eyes tracked Nia like a hawk sizing up prey. She felt their stares crawl over her, prickling her skin as she popped the gas cap and reached for the nozzle. "Look at that," the bearded one muttered, loud enough to carry across the lot, his voice thick with a drawl that dripped disdain. "'Tain't from around here, that's for damn sure." The wiry one snickered, spitting a wad of tobacco juice into the dirt, the splatter landing inches from her SUV's tire. "Probably lost," he added, his tone a mocking jab. "Uppity type like her don't know these roads." Nia's jaw tightened, her fingers pausing on the pump trigger. She'd heard worse, faced down cartel lawyers and crooked cops who'd slung every slur in the book. But this was different, raw and unfiltered, the kind of hate that festered in places like Hollow Pines, where time hadn't moved since the 60s. She shook it off, sliding her card into the reader, the machine, beeping as it approved $20 of unleaded. She wasn't here to pick fights, just to get gas and go. But the weight of their eyes bore into her, a silent dare she couldn't quite ignore. The pump clicked on, fuel gurgling into the tank, and Nia strode toward the station's entrance, her heels snapping against the pavement, with a rhythm that cut through the stillness. The men's muttering grew louder, their words slithering after her, but she kept her head high, her legal mind already filing it away as petty noise. Inside, the air hit her like a slap, heavy with the stench of motor oil and stale cigarettes. the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of flies. Behind the counter stood Vernon Holt, the owner, a wiry white man in his 50s, his buzz-cut hair greying at the temples, his scowl carved deep into a face weathered by sun and spite. His plaid shirt hung loose, stained with grease streaks, and his pale eyes flicked up as she approached, narrowing into slits that screamed trouble before she even opened her mouth. A white guy in a faded denim jacket stood at the counter, fumbling, with a wad of crumpled bills to buy a pack of Marlboros, his boots scuffing the linoleum as he shuffled aside. Nia waited, her $20 bill crisp in her hand, expecting Vernon to finish the transaction and turn to her, but when the denim guy slunk off, Vernon pivoted away, pretending to shuffle a stack of yellowed receipts like she wasn't even there. "Excuse me," Nia said, her voice calm but edged with steel, the kind she used to silence courtroom bluster. "I need to prepay for pump 3. Vernon didn't look up, just grunted, a low rumble in his throat, and flicked a hand as if swatting a fly. "Hold your horses," he muttered, his drawl lazy but laced with venom. Nia blinked, patience thinning like a frayed thread, and stepped closer, placing the bill on the counter with a deliberate tap. "I've been waiting," she said, her tone still even. "Can you ring me up?" Before Vernon could respond, the bell above the door jangled and another white man barged in, this one in a stained flannel shirt that reeked of cheap beer, his bleary eyes bloodshot from a long day or a longer night. He shoved past Nia, his elbow clipping her shoulder hard enough to knock her into a rickety display of beef jerky, the plastic bags rattling as they hit the floor. He slapped a crumpled 10 on the counter, barking, "Vernon, get me some chew, quick now," his voice a slurred demand that ignored her entirely. Nia's breath caught, disbelief sparking into a slow burn of anger as she steadied herself, brushing dust off her blazer. "I was here first," she said, locking eyes with Vernon, her words clipped and pointed. "You saw me standing here." Vernon finally met her gaze, his lips curling into a sneer that bared yellowed teeth, his face flushing red as if her presence was a personal insult. "He's a regular," he snapped, jabbing a finger at the flannel guy. "You ain't. Wait your turn." The flannel guy chuckled, leaning on the counter like he owned the place, his sour breath wafting toward her. "Yeah, lady, don't make a fuss," he slurred, his smirk daring her to push back. Nia's pulse quickened, heat rising in her chest. But she kept her voice steady, years of courtroom battles honing her control. "Regular or not," she said, each word a measured strike. "I'm a customer. I'd appreciate you finishing with me first." Vernon's sneer twisted tighter, his hand slamming the counter so hard the jar of pennies beside the register rattled, the clink echoing in the cramped space. "You don't belong here, girl," he spat, the word girl landing like a slap, dripping with venom that made the air curdle. "Take your money and your attitude somewhere else." Outside, the two men on the bench perked up, craning their necks to peer through the smudged glass, their grins widening as the scene unfolded. Nia squared her shoulders, her legal mind kicking into overdrive, cataloguing every detail. The slur, the shove, the refusal of service. She wasn't about to let this slide. "I'm asking for fair treatment," she said, her voice rising, each syllable a chisel against his smug facade. "That's not a lecture, it's a fact." Vernon's face darkened, his pale eyes glinting with malice as he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a guttural hiss. "Fair? You don't get to demand nothing in my store. You're causing a scene and I don't take to that." The flannel guy smirked wider, egging him on. "She's trouble, Vernon," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "Bet she's one of them city types, thinks they run everything." Nia's blood boiled, the casual racism igniting a fire she'd tamped down too many times before. She slid another 20 onto the counter, her fingers steady despite the fury clawing her insides. "Pump 3, she said, her voice like steel, daring him to refuse again. Vernon snatched the bills, his knuckles whitening, but instead of ringing her up, he grabbed the phone from under the counter, his lips twisting into a cruel grin. "No, you're done here," he said, dialing with exaggerated slowness. "I'm calling the law. Loitering and mouthing off ain't welcome." Nia's heart pounded, disbelief warring with outrage as she stood her ground, her blazer sleeve brushing the counter's chipped edge. "Loitering," she shot back, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm trying to pay for gas." Vernon ignored her, muttering into the receiver. "Yeah, Roy, got a problem at the store. Come quick." The bell jangled again, and in strode Deputy Roy Tanner, a wiry man in his 40s, his khaki uniform crisp despite the sweat stains under his arms, his badge gleaming like a trophy on his chest. His boots thudded on the linoleum, his hand resting on the holster at his hip, and his blue eyes locked onto Naya with a cold glint that promised trouble. Vernon pointed at her like she was a stray dog caught rummaging trash. "She's harassing." "Me, Roy," he lied, his voice oily with fake grievance. "Won't leave when I told her to." Nia stepped forward, hands raised to keep the peace, her composure a shield against the rising storm. "That's not true," she said, her words firm and clear. "I was trying to prepay for gas, and he refused to serve me." Tanner's lip curled, cutting her off with a gruff bark. "ID now," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for debate. She froze, her instincts screaming trap, years of legal training flashing warning lights in her skull. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice rising a fraction. "Why do you need my ID?" His expression hardened, his hand twitching toward his gun. "You're causing a disturbance," he growled. "Show it or I'm taking you in." Nia's mind raced, cataloguing the power play. No probable cause, no crime, just pure bias flexing its muscle. She saw the two men outside, grinning through the glass, Vernon's smug nod egging Tanner on, and knew arguing would only tighten the noose. She reached into her purse, pulled out her driver's license and handed it over, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her gut. Tanner barely glanced at it before barking, "Turn around, hands behind your back." Her stomach dropped, shock crashing over her like ice water. "For what?" she demanded, her voice spiking with defiance. "Disturbing the peace," he snapped, yanking cuffs from his belt, the metal glinting under the buzzing lights. "And resisting if you don't comply right now." Every fiber of her screamed to fight, to recite statutes and case law, to tear this sham apart. But Tanner's hand hovered over his holster, and the air thickened with threat. She'd seen this in depositions, small-town deputies bending laws to crush anyone who didn't fit their mold. But living it was a gut punch she hadn't braced for. She turned, jaw clenched tight, as the cold steel snapped around her wrists, the click echoing like a gavel's fall. "I'm an attorney," she said, voice steady despite the tremor shaking her core. "You're making a mistake." Tanner smirked, shoving her toward the door, his grip bruising her arm. "Tell it to the judge, sweetheart," he sneered. "I ain't no lawyer helping you here," Vernon chuckled, leaning against the counter as Tanner marched her out, the two men on the bench hooting like it was a damn parade. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lot as Tanner shoved her into his cruiser, the door slamming shut with a thud that rattled her bones. Through the window, she caught Vernon's satisfied grin, the bearded man's low laugh, rumbling loud enough to pierce the glass. "Should have kept her mouth shut," he muttered, spitting another wad of tobacco as the engine roared to life. Hollow Pines blurred past, its sagging porches and faded signs a sleepy facade hiding. The venom beneath. Nia's wrists ached under the cuffs, but her mind spun, piecing together the trap. A refused sale, a planted fight, and now a deputy's word against hers. This wasn't just a bad stop. It was the opening salvo in a war she'd never signed. Up for. One that would test every ounce of her will before the sun rose again. Nia Jackson sat rigid in the back of Deputy Roy Tanner's cruiser, the cuffs biting into her wrists as the Hollow Pines Sheriff's Station loomed ahead, a squat brick building with chipped paint glowing faintly under a flickering street lamp. The late afternoon sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised purple, and the air inside the car reeked of stale sweat and Tanner's cheap cologne, a cloying mix that churned her stomach. Her navy blazer was wrinkled from the rough arrest at Holt's Fuel, her braids tangled where Vernon's shove had knocked her into the jerky display, and every jolt of the uneven road sent a fresh stab of anger through her chest. She was 37, a U.S. attorney who'd faced down kingpins and corrupt judges, but here she was, cuffed like a common thug over a $20 gas fill-up, her license still clutched in Tanner's meaty paw as he whistled a tuneless melody that grated on her nerves. The station's double doors swung open as he yanked her out, his grip bruising her arm through the fabric of her sleeve, and marched her inside, his boots thudding on the cracked asphalt with a rhythm that promised more trouble than she'd bargained for on this quiet trip to see her father. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the station's scuffed linoleum floor, a faded checkerboard of black and white that mirrored the town's unspoken rules. Nia's heels echoed in the empty lobby, each click a defiant beat against the silence, her mind racing to catalogue every detail. Tanner's smirk, Vernon's lies, the two locals' leers still burning in her memory. She'd been in stations like this before, but always on the other side, prosecuting cases with a briefcase in hand, not shackled like prey. Tanner shoved her toward a metal desk bolted to the wall, its surface scratched with initials and curses from decades of detainees, and barked, "Sit!" his voice a low growl as he tossed her license onto a pile of coffee-stained reports. She complied, her posture stiff, refusing to let him see the tremor in her hands as the cuffs rubbed her skin raw. The door to the sheriff's office creaked open, and out lumbered Sheriff Amos Brandt, a hulking figure whose khaki uniform stretched tight over a barrel chest, his buzzed grey hair glinting under the light like steel wool. A Confederate pin gleamed on his collar, a badge of pride that made Nia's stomach twist, and his hazel eyes locked onto her with a mix of contempt and amusement, sizing her up like a hunter eyeing a trapped deer. "What's this mess Tanner's dragged in?" Brandt drawled, his southern twang thick as molasses, his meaty hands resting on a belt weighed down by a holstered pistol and a ring of keys that jangled with every step. Tanner straightened, puffing out his chest like a kid eager for praise. "Caught her causing trouble at Vernon's," he said, his smirk widening. "Says she's some big-shot lawyer, but get this. Vernon claims she assaulted him. Got witnesses, too." Nia's breath caught, disbelief crashing into fury as she rose halfway from the chair, her voice cutting through the stale air. "That's a lie," she said, her tone steady despite the heat flaring in her chest. "I never touched him. Vernon refused me service, called me slurs, and shoved me first." Brandt tilted his head, studying her like she was a specimen under glass, his lips curling into a faint grin that showed teeth yellowed by years of tobacco. "Assault, huh?" he mused, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. "Vernon's a good old boy, been here forever. You, though, you're just passing through, stirring up mess." He stepped closer, his bulk towering over her, the faint scent of sweat and gun oil rolling off him as he leaned in, his shadow swallowing the light. "Tell you what," he said, his voice dropping low, "you're in my house now, and I don't take kindly to outsiders mouthing off." Nia's pulse spiked, outrage simmering beneath her calm exterior, but she saw the trap snapping shut. Tanner's false report, Vernon's word, and now this sheriff's unspoken threat. She needed leverage, something to turn this around before it spiraled deeper. Her fingers brushed the edge of her blazer pocket where her phone sat, a slim lifeline she'd kept silent since the gas station. "I want my lawyer," she said, her words sharp and deliberate, testing his reaction. "That's my right." Brandt's grin vanished, his face darkening as he slammed his fist against the desk, the impact rattling the metal chair beneath her and sending a pen skittering to the floor. "Rights?" he roared, his voice bouncing off the cinder-block walls. "Ain't no rights for your kind here. You assaulted a man, and I'm betting you're dumb enough to make it worse." Nia's heart thudded, but her legal mind kicked into overdrive, years of training overriding the fear clawing at her gut. She slipped her hand into her pocket, thumbing the phone's record button with a practiced flick, the faint hum of the device masked by Brandt's heavy breathing. "You're twisting this," she said, leaning forward, her voice steady as she baited him. "Because I'm black? Because I wouldn't bow to your buddy's racism?" Brandt's eyes narrowed, a flicker of rage breaking his calm, and he grabbed her by the collar, yanking her up and slamming her against the wall so hard her head snapped back, pain blooming across her skull. "Keep talking, girl," he snarled, his breath hot on her face, his fingers digging into her shoulders. "Every word's another charge. You're looking at a real bad night." Nia gritted her teeth, the phone still recording as she memorized his every move. The pin, the threats, the violence. She had him now, she thought, a sliver of control in this chaos, Evidence that could crack this sham wide open once she got it to her DOJ contact. Darius Wells. Her lips twitched into a faint smile, defiance sparking in her brown eyes as she stared him down. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low but firm. "One you can't undo." Brandt froze for a split second, his grip tightening, then let out a guttural laugh that echoed through the station, a sound that chilled her blood. "Mistake?" He spat, shoving her back into the chair with enough force to bruise her tailbone. "Only mistake here's you thinking you're smart." He jerked his thumb toward a hallway lined with rusted cell doors, the paint peeling like old scabs. "Tanner, get her processed. I want her locked up tight." Tanner nodded, hauling her up by the arm, but before they could move, 3 more deputies burst through the side door, their boots pounding the floor like a war drum. They were younger, leaner, their faces flushed with adrenaline, and their eyes glinted with something feral as they surrounded her. "Heard she's trouble," one muttered, cracking his knuckles, his badge reading Caleb. Brandt stepped back, folding his arms, his grin widening as he nodded. "Show her how we handle trouble round here," he said, his voice a low command that unleashed the storm. Nia's heart slammed against her ribs as Caleb lunged, his fist crashing into her stomach, doubling her over with a gasp that stole her breath. She stumbled, the cuffs yanking her arms back, and another deputy, his name tag lost in the blur, drove his elbow into her jaw, the crack of bone on bone ringing in her ears. Pain exploded across her face, blood trickling from her lip as she hit the floor, her blazer tearing at the seam. She tried to twist away, her training kicking in, but the third deputy grabbed her braids, wrenching her head back as he kicked her ribs, the impact sending a white-hot jolt through her chest. "Stop," she rasped, her voice hoarse, but they didn't hear or didn't care, their laughter mixing with Brandt's as he loomed over the scene, his shadow a monstrous silhouette against the buzzing lights. Caleb snatched her phone from her pocket, the screen still glowing red with the recording, and smashed it against the wall, the crack of shattering glass punctuating the assault. "No fancy lawyers saving you now," Brandt said, his voice thick with triumph as he watched the device splinter into pieces, the evidence she'd fought for reduced to shards on the linoleum. The deputies stepped back, panting, their fists bruised and bloody, leaving Nia crumpled on the floor, her blazer smeared with dirt and crimson streaks. Her ribs throbbed, her jaw pulsed with every heartbeat, and her wrists burned where the cuffs had twisted during the beating. She coughed, tasting copper, and forced her good eye open, the other swelling shut as she glared up at Brandt, his Confederate pin glinting like a taunt. He crouched beside her, his breath sour with tobacco as he leaned in close. "Welcome to Hollow Pines," he whispered, his grin a slash of malice. "You ain't leaving till I say so." He rose, jerking his head at the deputies. "Lock her up, we'll see how tough she is come morning." Caleb hauled her to her feet, dragging her down the hallway as her legs buckled, her body screaming in protest. The cell door clanged shut, a rusted cage barely 6 feet wide, its concrete floor stained with years of despair. She sank onto the metal bench, the chill seeping through her slacks, and replayed the ambush. Tanner's cuffs, Brandt's slam, the deputy's fists, her phone's destruction. This wasn't just bias. It was a machine built to crush her, oiled by hate and fueled by power. She'd thought she'd outsmarted them with that recording, a lifeline to turn the tables, but they'd smashed it, and her, with a brutality that dwarfed the gas station clash. Nia clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, and forced her breathing to steady, pain sharpening her resolve. She'd faced long odds before, stared down death threats from cartel hitmen, but this was personal. A town that fed on her skin color like wolves on a wounded animal. Her title, her career, her very identity meant nothing to them. She was just another target, another chance to flex their rotting authority. But Nia Jackson didn't break. She'd torn apart worse in federal court, and if they thought a beating would silence her, they were dead wrong. The cell's silence pressed in, broken only by the drip of a leak down the hall, and she knew this was just the start. What would they do next to bury her deeper? Drop a comment with number 1. If you think a sheriff like Brandt deserves to rot behind his own bars, then hit like and subscribe to see Nia fight back. Can she claw her way out of this cage, or will Hollow Pine's next move snap her in half? Nia Jackson slumped against the cold metal bench in her rusted cell, wrists raw and bruised beneath the cuffs that Sheriff Amos Brandt's deputies had left locked tight after their savage beating, her navy blazer now a tattered mess streaked with blood and dirt from the Hollow Pines Sheriff's station floor. Her ribs ached with every shallow breath, a sharp reminder of the fists and boots that had pummeled her hours ago, and her jaw throbbed where an elbow had split her lip, the taste of copper lingering on her tongue. The cell's flickering bulb cast a sickly yellow glow over the stained concrete, its 6-foot width closing in like a coffin. But her mind burned sharp, replaying Brandt's threats and the shattered remains of her phone, her one shot at evidence now dust. Dawn crept through a barred slit high on the wall, painting the peeling paint in faint streaks of grey, and the distant clang of boots jolted her upright, her swollen left eye squinting as Deputy Caleb's lanky frame filled the doorway, his knuckles still red from her blood. He smirked, twirling a keyring, and barked, "Time to move, Princess," his voice a taunt as he yanked her up, her legs wobbling, but her spine stiffening with defiance. Caleb dragged her down the mildew-stinking hallway, her heels scraping the linoleum as she fought to keep pace, pain flaring through her battered frame with every step. The station buzzed with early morning activity, deputies sipping coffee from chipped mugs, their laughter cutting through the hum of a radio spitting static, and Brandt loomed near the exit, his hulking figure dwarfing the desk where her license still sat among crumpled reports. His Confederate pin glinted as he nodded at Caleb, his hazel eyes flicking over her like she was trash to be swept away. "Court's waiting," he said, his drawl thick with menace. "Judge Crane don't like delays." Nia's stomach twisted, her legal mind screaming trap, but she kept her face stone cold, refusing to give him the flinch he craved. They shoved her into a cruiser, the vinyl seat sticking to her torn slacks, and the short drive blurred past Hollow Pine's sagging porches and faded storefronts, the town waking to a day already rigged against her. The courthouse loomed ahead, a crumbling brick relic of old Georgia money, its facade stained with decades of neglect, the steps flanked by 2 white men in overalls who spat tobacco and grinned. As Caleb hauled her inside, the lobby smelled of mildew and wax, its wooden benches worn smooth by years of waiting, and Nia's wrists burned as the cuffs cut deeper, her blazer sleeve snagging on a splintered rail as they pushed her into a packed courtroom. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and polished wood, sunlight slanting through dusty windows to illuminate a sea of weathered faces, mostly white, their murmurs buzzing like hornets over a kicked nest. Nia stood at the defendant's table, smoothing her blazer as best she could, her braids matted with dried blood, and scanned the room with her good eye, cataloguing the players in this sham. Judge Harold Crane presided from a high bench, his thinning grey hair slicked back, his cold blue eyes barely glancing her way, a man in his 60s whose lined face spoke of unchallenged power. Beside him, Prosecutor Travis Boone adjusted his tie, a wiry white man in his 40s with a sharp jaw and a grin too tight to trust. At her side slouched Eli Cobb, her public defender, a disheveled drunk with bloodshot eyes and a suit that reeked of stale whiskey, his breath a sour cloud as he muttered incoherently. Crane banged his gavel, the crack silencing the room, and drawled, "Case number 842, State versus Nia Jackson." His voice flat with disinterest as he flipped through a folder, papers rustling like dry leaves. "Charges of assault resisting arrest. Let's make this quick." Travis rose, exuding a slick confidence, his voice smooth as he addressed the bench. "Your Honor, the defendant attacked Vernon Holt, a respected local, with intent to harm, resisted Deputy Tanner's lawful arrest. We've got statements from Vernon and 2 witnesses, plus Sheriff Brandt's report. She's a danger to this community." Nia's stomach twisted, the lies stacking like bricks, but she kept her expression steady, her legal training a lifeline in this cesspool. Eli mumbled something about pleading out, fumbling with a notepad stained with coffee rings, then sank back into his chair, wiping sweat from his brow with a trembling hand. Nia shot him a glare, realizing he was useless, a prop in this farce, and stood, her voice slicing through the murmurs like a blade. "For Your Honor, I'll represent myself," she said, her tone firm, ignoring the jury's gasps. 12 white faces already set against her, their eyes hard with prejudice. Crane raised an eyebrow, smirking faintly as he leaned back. "Bold. Move," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Go on, then." Nia squared her shoulders, her ribs protesting as she drew a breath, and began, her words crisp despite the pain pulsing through her jaw. "The prosecution's case is built on fabrications. I never assaulted Vernon Holt. He refused me service at his gas station, used racial slurs, and shoved me first. Deputy Tanner arrested me without cause, planted a knife to frame me. I demand to see the physical evidence. Vernon's supposed injuries, Tanner's report, anything to back these claims." Travis chuckled, leaning on his table, his grin widening as he countered. "No knife needed when witnesses saw her swinging, Your Honor. Vernon's got bruises, documented at the scene." Nia's fists clenched at her sides, fury simmering as she pressed her advantage, her voice rising to cut through his smugness. "Where's the medical report? Where's the weapon? This is hearsay dressed up as fact." She turned to Crane, her gaze unflinching. "I request discovery of all evidence, including Deputy Tanner's arrest log and any footage from the station." The room tensed, a ripple of unease passing through the crowd, whispers swelling as the jury shifted in their seats. She caught a flicker of doubt in one juror's eyes, a middle-aged woman with grey streaks in her hair, her pencil pausing over her notepad. Nia's pulse quickened, a spark of hope igniting. She was swaying someone, cracking their wall of lies. Maybe this wasn't over yet. Travis's grin faltered for a split second, his fingers tightening on his tie, but Crane leaned back, tapping a pen against his desk, his cold eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Irrelevant," Crane snapped, his voice flat, cutting off the murmurs like a guillotine. "Witness statements are enough. Request denied." Nia blinked, disbelief crashing over her like a wave, her breath catching as she stepped forward. "Denied," she said, her voice rising, sharp with outrage. "That's a violation of due process. I have a right to confront my accusers and examine the evidence." Crane's eyes darkened, irritation breaking his calm as he pointed the gavel at her, its polished wood gleaming under the lights. "You're in my court, Miss Jackson," he said, his tone a low growl. "I say what's relevant. Sit down." Travis smirked, folding his arms, and Eli hiccuped beside her, his head lolling as he dozed off, useless as a sack of flour. Nia's mind raced, piecing together the game. This wasn't a trial. It was a lynching with a gavel, every move rigged, to bury her beneath their word. She pressed on, refusing to fold, her voice steady as she seized the opening. "Then I call Vernon Holt to testify under oath," she said, her words ringing out, daring them to dodge again. "Let's hear his story firsthand." The crowd shifted, whispers swelling into a low roar, and Travis's grin slipped, his eyes darting to Crane as he scrambled. "Vernon's unavailable, Your Honor," he said, recovering fast. Recovering from his injuries, his sworn statement stands. Nia seized the crack, her tone cutting like a whip. "Unavailable? Convenient. If he's too hurt to testify, where's the doctor's note? This is a pattern of evasion." The grey-haired juror frowned, scribbling again, and Nia's chest tightened with a flicker of triumph. She was rattling them, exposing their flimsy house of cards. Crane slammed his gavel, the sound sharp enough to make Eli flinch awake, his bleary eyes blinking in confusion. "Enough," he barked, his voice a thunderclap. "I've heard plenty." "Prosecution, proceed." Nia sat, her pulse pounding, knowing she'd forced them to squirm, but the jury's blank stares told her it might not matter. Travis called Tanner as his first witness, the deputy swaggering to the stand, his badge glinting as he lied through his teeth. "Saw her swing at Vernon myself," he said, his voice steady. "Resisted me too. Had to cuff her hard." Nia stood for cross-examination, her questions slicing through his bravado. "Where's your body cam footage, deputy? Why no photos of Vernon's bruises?" Tanner shrugged, smirking faintly. "Cam was off. Don't need pictures when I saw it." She pressed harder, her voice a steel edge. "You saw me with a knife?" "Describe it." He faltered, mumbling, "Standard 1 metal." And the grey-haired juror's frown deepened, her pencil scratching furiously. Crane cut her off, his gavel hovering. "That's enough, Miss Jackson," he snapped. "Next witness." The trial dragged on, a parade of lies from Tanner and one of Vernon's bench cronies who claimed she'd yelled threats, his tobacco-stained, teeth flashing as he grinned. Nia dismantled each story, pointing out contradictions, her legal mind ablaze against their blunt force, but Crane overruled every objection, his rulings a wall she couldn't breach. Eli snored softly beside her, and the crowd's murmurs grew smug, sensing her defeat. She'd thought she was gaining ground, showing the jury the holes in their tale, but their stony faces told her this wasn't about truth, it was about power. And Hollow Pines' power didn't bend for her. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the windows, Crane leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "We'll wrap this tomorrow," he said, his eyes glinting with finality. "Prosecution rests." Travis nodded, satisfied, and Caleb shot her a wink from the back as Brant loomed near the door, his hulking frame a silent promise of worse to come. Nia sat, her hands trembling with suppressed rage, knowing the verdict was a formality, but she'd planted seeds, shaken their confidence. She'd exposed Vernon's absence, Tanner's lies, and Crane's bias, and that was something. They thought they'd silence her, but she was just warming up. Then Crane cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the fading murmurs. "Court's adjourned," he said, rising, "but we've had a threat reported. Everyone out." The room erupted, deputies ushering the crowd through the exits, their boots pounding as Nia's heart sank. This was no adjournment. It was a setup. Caleb and another deputy grabbed her arms, their grips bruising as they dragged her through a side door, down a creaking stairwell to a basement level, the air damp and heavy with the stench of mold. She struggled, her ribs screaming, but they shoved her into a windowless cell, its concrete walls slick with condensation, a single bulb swaying overhead. Brant followed, his boots thudding as he loomed in the doorway, a manila folder in his hands, her case notes snatched from the defendant's table. "You're a problem," he said, his voice low and venomous, pulling a lighter from his pocket. The flame flared, licking the edges of the papers, and he tossed them into a rusted bucket, the fire crackling as it devoured her defense. "You'll disappear before sunrise," he said, his grin a slash of malice as the smoke curled upward, choking the air. Nia lunged forward, her cuffs yanking her back, pain searing through her shoulders as the ashes drifted to the floor. "You can't bury this," she spat, her voice hoarse but unbroken. Brant laughed, stepping closer, his Confederate pin glinting in the firelight. "Watch me," he said, slamming the cell door shut with a clang that rattled her bones. The bulb flickered, plunging her into near darkness, the embers glowing faintly in the bucket as his footsteps faded. She sank against the wall, her blazer smudged with soot, her body a map of bruises, and replayed the trial. Vernon's lies, Crane's rulings, Brant's fists. She'd swayed a juror, rattled their cage, but they'd countered with this. A death. Threat masked as procedure. Her notes were ash, her hope a flicker, and sunrise loomed like a guillotine. This wasn't just a rigged trial. It was a tomb, and they'd sealed her in with no way out. Nia Jackson slumped against the damp concrete wall of the Hollow Pines courthouse basement cell, her wrists raw and bleeding beneath the cuffs that Sheriff Amos Brant had left locked tight, the cold metal biting deeper with every twitch of her battered body. Her navy blazer hung in tatters, smeared with soot from the ashes of her burned case notes, and her slacks clung to her legs, stiff with sweat and grime from the long night since her sham trial. Pain pulsed through her ribs, cracked from the deputy's fists, and her swollen left eye throbbed in rhythm with her racing heart, the right one scanning the dim space lit only by a swaying bulb that cast jagged shadows across the slick floor. The air was heavy with mold and despair, the bucket of charred papers smoldering faintly in the corner, a cruel reminder of Brant's vow to make her disappear before sunrise. Hours had crawled by since he'd slammed the rusted door shut, each tick of an unseen clock a countdown to something worse than the beating she'd endured, and her mind churned, plotting escape routes despite the exhaustion clawing at her bones. She was 37, a U.S. attorney who'd faced death threats in federal cases, but this was a different beast, a small-town machine oiled by hate and ready to crush her for daring to breathe its air. Her good eye caught a glint on the floor, a hairpin she'd lost when Caleb dragged her down the stairwell, its silver curve half buried in the dust near the bench. Nia's breath hitched, a spark of hope piercing the dread as she slid to her knees, her ribs screaming with the effort, and stretched her cuffed hands toward it, fingers trembling as they closed around the slim metal. She'd picked locks before, a trick learned from a DOJ mentor during a sting operation gone sideways, and now it was her lifeline. The cuffs clinked as she twisted the pin into the keyhole, her legal mind steadying her shaking hands, each scrape of metal a whisper of freedom. Sweat beaded on her forehead, dripping onto the concrete, and her braids swung forward, brushing her bruised cheek as she worked, the lock resisting with every turn. Footsteps echoed faintly down the hall, heavy and uneven, a guard pacing the night shift, and her pulse spiked, urging her faster. What if Brant came back before she broke free? The pin clicked, the cuffs snapping open with a soft thud, and Nia rubbed her wrists, red welts pulsing beneath her torn sleeves, relief flooding her chest as she stood, wobbly but alive. She crept to the cell door, its rusted hinges groaning under her touch, and peered through the bars, the hallway a tunnel of shadows stretching toward a stairwell 30 feet away. A single guard slouched at a desk near the exit, his head lolling, a half-empty coffee mug tipping in his hand as snores rumbled from his throat. Nia's heart pounded, her body a wreck of bruises and cuts, but she saw her shot, a narrow window. Dove's silence before the station woke. She eased the door open, the creak swallowed by the guard's next snore, and slipped into the hall, her heels clicking softly as she hugged the wall, every step a gamble against collapse. The stairwell loomed, closer, its metal steps promising escape, and she climbed, her breath ragged, pain searing her side where a boot had landed hours ago. She reached the ground floor, a side exit glowing faintly under an emergency light, and pushed through the cool night air hitting her like a slap as she stumbled into the darkness, stars blotted out by thick clouds rolling over hollow pines. Nia sprinted across the courthouse lawn, her legs burning, the town's sagging rooftops a blur as she darted toward a row of pines 50 yards off, their needles a shield against the station's glare. Her chest heaved, freedom tasting sharp and sweet, a fleeting triumph after the trial's chokehold and Brant's fists. She'd outsmarted them, slipped their cage, and now she could reach her SUV, call Darius Wells at the DOJ, get the feds down here to tear this rotting town apart. She ducked into the trees, pine sap sticking to her torn blazer, and leaned against a trunk, catching her breath, her good eye scanning the shadows for pursuit. The night was still, crickets chirping faintly over the hum of a distant highway, and she let herself believe she'd made it, that sunrise wouldn't find her buried in Brant's trap. Then headlights flared, a truck roaring up the dirt path, flanking the woods, its engine a guttural snarl that shattered the quiet, and Nia's stomach dropped, adrenaline flooding her veins as she crouched low, peering through the branches. The truck screeched to a halt, dust swirling in the beams, and 4 masked men piled out, their boots thudding on the packed earth, their silhouettes hulking against the night sky. One carried a baseball bat, its wood chipped and stained. Another gripped a length of chain that clinked with every step, and the others cracked their fists, knuckles thick with scars glinting under the truck's lights. Nia's heart slammed against her ribs, her mind screaming ambush as she pressed deeper into the pines, needles pricking her palms. Brant's voice echoed in her skull. "You'll disappear." And now she saw the play, a staged escape to justify worse. The bat swung first, a blur aimed at her head, as the leader lunged through the trees, his mask a black void with slits for eyes. She ducked, years of self-defense training snapping into gear, and drove her elbow into his gut, the air whooshing out of him as he grunted, staggering back. The chain guy charged, wrapping the links around her arm and yanking her off balance, pain searing through her shoulder as she hit the ground, mud soaking her slacks and stinging her cuts. She rolled, dodging a boot aimed at her ribs, the crunch of pine cones underfoot drowned by the men's guttural shouts, and scrambled to her feet, fists raised as she circled them, her breath ragged in the damp air. "You're cowards," she spat, her voice a hoarse rasp, defiance fueling her as the bat came again, cracking against her thigh with a sickening thud that buckled her leg. She stumbled, biting back a scream, her vision blurring as the chain lashed her back, tearing through her blazer and drawing blood that welled hot under the fabric. She swung wildly, her fist connecting with a masked jaw, bone crunching under her knuckles, and the man howled, clutching his face as he reeled. The third grabbed her braids, wrenching her head back and slamming her face first into the dirt, pine needles jabbing her cheek as blows rained down, fists and steel and wood pummeling her body with a ferocity that dwarfed the station's beating. Nia clawed at the mud, her nails snapping as she fought to breathe, pain a thunderclap drowning her senses, but she refused to break, her mind clinging to survival. The fourth man kicked her side, his steel-toed boot sinking into her cracked ribs, and she gasped, blood bubbling in her throat as her vision swam. Their laughter rang out, a hyena's cackle cutting through the chaos, and she caught a glimpse of the truck's license plate, Holt 3, tying them to Vernon's clan. This wasn't random, it was Brant's hired muscle, a death squad to erase her escape. The bat rose again, aimed at her skull, and she rolled, mud slicking her hands as she grabbed a fallen branch, jabbing it into the leader's knee with a crack that dropped him howling. She staggered up, her legs screaming, and broke for the trees, their shouts chasing her as she stumbled deeper into the woods, blood dripping from her lip and soaking her torn sleeve. The beating stopped as abruptly as it started, the men stepping back, panting, their masks askew as they watched her falter. Nia collapsed in a ditch 20 yards off, rain starting to fall, cold drops mixing with the blood on her face and washing it into the muck. Her thigh pulsed where the bat had struck, her back burned from the chain's lash, and every inch of her throbbed, a map of agony etched into her flesh. Headlights flared again, not the truck's glare but a cruiser's blue sweep cutting through the night, and she tensed, expecting Brant, but it rolled past, a routine patrol oblivious to her. Ruin. The masked men piled back into their truck, their laughter fading as the engine roared to life, tail lights vanishing into the rain-soaked dark, leaving her half dead in the ditch, mud caking her hands and knees. Nia lay there, rain hammering, her swollen eye, her body a wreck but her mind blazing with fury. She'd picked the lock, slipped the cell, thought she'd won a breath of freedom only to stumble into this trap, a staged jailbreak to bury her deeper than the trial ever could. Her SUV was miles away, her phone ash, and now she was a fugitive in their twisted script, beaten to a pulp for daring to run. She coughed, blood flecking her lips, and forced herself to sit up, the ditch's edge crumbling under her weight as she gripped a root, pulling herself upright. They'd hit her hard, but they hadn't killed her, and that was their mistake. She'd broken a nose, left them limping, and survived their ambush, a flicker of fight still burning in her chest. Headlights flared again, closer now, sweeping. The road above the ditch and her good eye narrowed, survival kicking in. Who was coming next to finish what these thugs started? Drop a comment with number 1 if you think Nia's escape was a setup from the second she touched that hairpin, then hit like and subscribe to see her next stand. Could those headlights be her lifeline, or has Hollow Pines already scripted her grave? Nia Jackson lay crumpled in the muddy ditch beside Hollow Pines' deserted back road, rain pounding her battered body as blood trickled from her split lip, mixing with the cold water pooling beneath her torn navy blazer. Her slacks were soaked through, clinging to her bruised legs, and every breath stabbed her cracked ribs, a searing reminder of the masked men's bats and chains that had pummeled her after her escape from the courthouse basement. Her swollen left eye throbbed, nearly sealed shut, but her right one darted to the headlights, sweeping closer, cutting through the downpour like a predator's gaze. She tensed, mud caking her trembling hands, expecting Sheriff Amos Brant's cruiser to finish what his hired thugs started, her mind racing with the sting of their last laugh, echoing in the woods. The lights slowed, a battered sedan pulling off the road, its engine coughing as it rolled to a stop 10 yards above the ditch, and Nia's good eye narrowed, survival warring with exhaustion as a figure stepped out, umbrella in hand, silhouetted against the glare. The figure hurried over, rain drumming the umbrella, and Nia's breath caught as a black woman in her late 40s knelt beside her, brown eyes wide with concern beneath a tight bun of graying hair. Her maid's uniform peeked from under a raincoat, the hem frayed but clean, and her voice was soft yet urgent as she gasped, "Lord, what happened to you?" Nia coughed, wincing as pain flared through her chest, her voice a hoarse rasp over the rain's roar. "Set up," Sheriff's men beat me, dumped me here. The woman's grip steadied her, pulling her up from the muck, and Nia leaned into her, legs buckling as the stranger half carried her to the sedan. "Name's Lila Moore," the woman said, her tone firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I work at the motel up the road, can't leave you like this." Nia hesitated, trussed a jagged edge after the ambush, but the cruiser's distant wail pushed her forward, and she nodded, mud smearing the seat as she sank into the car, the warmth a fragile shield against the night's chill. The drive was short, rain hammering the roof as Lila navigated the winding road, her knuckles white on the wheel, and Nia clutched her torn sleeve, blood seeping through her fingers from the chain's lash. The motel emerged from the dark, a run-down strip of rooms, with a neon sign buzzing Pine Rest in flickering green, its lot empty, save for a rusted pickup parked crooked near the office. Lila helped her inside room 7, the air thick with mildew and cigarette smoke, and Nia sank onto a lumpy bed, springs creaking under her weight, as Lila locked the door with a click that echoed in the cramped space. The walls were stained yellow, a chipped dresser holding a flickering TV, and a threadbare curtain swayed over a window streaked with grime. Lila fetched a first aid kit from her bag, her hands steady as she dabbed antiseptic on Nia's split lip, the sting sharpening her. "Focus." "You're safe here," Lila said, wrapping gauze around a gash on Nia's arm. "I've seen what they do to folks who don't fit their mold. Bastards." Nia winced, the burn of the antiseptic grounding her as she met Lila's gaze. Gratitude, mingling with desperation. "Thanks, Lila," she rasped, her throat raw. "I'm Nia. They're framing me for escaping custody, assaulting deputies. I need to reach my people." Lila nodded, pointing to a rotary phone on the nightstand, its cord tangled like a noose. "Use it," she said, her voice hard. "I'll keep watch." Nia dialed Darius Wells, her DOJ colleague, her fingers trembling as the line crackled, each ring a lifeline in the dark. His deep voice cut through, tight with worry. "Nia, where the hell are you?" She kept her tone low, glancing at the door as Lila peeked through the curtain. "Hollow Pines, Pine Rest Motel, room 7. Arrested on fake charges, beaten, staged. A jailbreak to cover it. Sheriff's dirty, framing me again. I need you to alert the feds now." Darius cursed, papers rustling in the background. "Georgia backwater, huh? I'm on it. Got a contact in Atlanta. I'll pull strings. Hang tight. We'll get you out." Nia exhaled, a sliver of relief loosening the knot in her chest as she hung up, the receiver clattering back into place. "Hurry," she whispered to the empty line, her good eye flicking to Lila, who gave a thumbs up from the window. Darius could move fast, and she'd sent him a backup file of Brandt's corruption weeks ago, stored on a secure DOJ server after a cartel case hinted at small-town ties. She leaned back, pain pulsing through her thigh where the bat had struck, and let herself believe help was near, that the feds would storm Hollow Pines and rip this nightmare apart. Lila brewed coffee on a rickety hot plate, the bitter scent filling the room, and handed her a chipped mug, her grim smile a flicker of solidarity. "You're tough," Lila said, settling into a wobbly chair. "Most'd be broken by now." Nia sipped, the warmth steadying her shaking hands. "Not yet," she said, her voice a steel thread. "They'll pay." The TV flickered on, Lila flipping channels to drown the silence, and Nia's blood froze as a local news broadcast blared, the screen filling with her face, a grainy mugshot. From the station, her swollen eye glaring back at her. "Breaking news from Hollow Pines," the anchor chirped, a white woman with a plastic smile, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Nia Jackson, wanted fugitive, escaped custody tonight. After assaulting deputies. Sources say she's a cop-killing threat, armed and dangerous." The footage cut to doctored clips. Nia swinging at Tanner in a blurry loop that never happened. Then Brandt on camera, his khaki uniform pristine, his hazel eyes grave. "She's a danger to our town," he lied, his drawl thick. "We'll hunt her down, protect our own." Nia's mug slipped, coffee splashing her slacks as her stomach churned, the smear campaign hitting like a fresh blow. "That's Crane's Brothers station," Lila muttered, her face paling. "They own WHPM, this is bad." Nia lunged for Lila's bag, pulling out a beat-up laptop, its keys sticky with grime, and powered it on, her legal mind racing despite the panic clawing her gut. "I sent Darius proof," she said, her voice tight as she logged into a DOJ backup site, fingers flying over the keyboard. "They can't bury this." The file uploaded, a zip of Brandt's threats and Vernon's. Ties, and she hit send. The chime of faint victory as the screen glowed in the dim room. She thought she'd bought time, a lifeline to turn the tide, until shouts erupted outside, a roar of voices swelling over the rain's drumbeat. Lila peeked through the curtain, her breath hitching. "Mob," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Torches. Bats, they're coming." Nia staggered to the window, her thigh screaming as she leaned on the sill and saw them. 30 locals, mostly white, their faces twisted with rage, marching from the road with fire licking their makeshift weapons. "Get her!" one bellowed, a man in a stained cap, his torch casting a glow over the lot. "Cop killers in there!" Glass shattered, a brick crashing through the window inches from Nia's head, and she dove back, dragging Lila with her as the mob surged closer, their chants a wall of hate. "They saw the news," Lila gasped, scrambling for her bag. "We gotta go." Nia's heart pounded, her good eye scanning the room as flames flickered outside, a Molotov cocktail smashing against the door, fire roaring up the frame with a whoosh that drowned her thoughts. She grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her toward the bathroom, the only exit left, and kicked the window above the sink, glass splintering as she smashed it with her elbow, pain lancing through her arm. "Out!" she barked, shoving Lila through, the older woman's raincoat snagging on the frame as she tumbled into the gravel lot. Nia followed, her ribs shrieking as she squeezed through, shards cutting her palms, and hit the ground rolling, heat searing her back as the motel blazed behind her. The mob's shouts grew louder, "Burn her out!" echoing over the crackle of flames, and Nia sprinted, dragging Lila toward a dumpster 50 feet off, her leg buckling under the bat's old bruise. They ducked behind it, mud soaking their knees, and Nia peered out, her breath ragged as the motel collapsed, fire swallowing the room where she'd called Darius, Lila's screams piercing the night as her livelihood turned to ash. Nia's chest heaved, fury drowning her pain as she watched the mob cheer, their torches waving like a victory flag. She'd found safety, sent proof to the feds, thought she'd outmaneuvered Brandt's machine, only to see it torched by a town-turned-executioner. The laptop was gone, her hideout rubble, and now she was prey in a hunt she hadn't seen coming. Lila clutched her arm, tears streaking her face, and Nia squeezed her hand, guilt gnawing at her for pulling this woman into her war. The rain thickened, a grey curtain blurring the flames, and Nia's good eye caught a shadow moving beyond the lot, a figure too calm for the chaos. Was it Brandt, come to gloat, or something worse? Nia Jackson crouched behind the dumpster in the Hollow Pines motel lot, rain hammering her bruised shoulders as flames devoured the pine rest, the crackle of burning wood drowning Lila Moore's choked sobs beside her. Her torn navy blazer clung to her battered frame, soaked with mud and blood from the masked men's ambush, and her slacks were shredded at the knees, the fabric stiff against her throbbing thigh, where a bat had struck hours ago. Her swollen left eye pulsed, barely a slit, but her right one burned with focus, scanning the chaos as the mob's torches waved, their chants of "cop killer" echoing over the roar of the fire that had swallowed her laptop and her call to Darius Wells at the DOJ. Lila's raincoat flapped as she gripped Nia's arm, her tight bun unraveling in the downpour, and Nia squeezed her hand back, guilt gnawing at her for dragging this woman into the inferno sparked by Sheriff Amos Brandt's media lies. The rain thickened, a grey veil blurring the mob's silhouettes, and Nia's good eye caught a shadow slipping away from the crowd, too deliberate for their drunken rage. She tensed, mud squelching under her heels, but before she could move, Lila whispered, "Bike," pointing to a rusted bicycle leaning against a shed 30 feet off, its chain glinting faintly in the firelight. Nia nodded, her ribs screaming, as she pulled Lila up, and they bolted, ducking low as the mob's shouts swelled behind them, a torch arcing through the air to crash against the dumpster with a burst of sparks. She grabbed the bike, its handlebars slick with rain, and shoved Lila onto the seat, swinging her leg over to pedal double, her thigh pulsing with every push. The gravel lot blurred beneath them, tires crunching as she veered onto a back road, the motel's glow fading into a smoldering scar against the night sky. Her breath came in gasps, pain lancing her side where the chain had lashed her back, but she pedaled harder, weaving through hollow pines' twisting lanes, past sagging trailers and boarded-up stores, the mob's roar shrinking with every turn. Lila clung to her waist, her voice trembling over the wind. "They'll hunt us," she said, and Nia gritted her teeth knowing she was right, Brant's news smear turning the town into a noose, tightening around her neck. She steered toward a cluster of pines flanking the road, their needles a dark curtain, and ditched the bike behind a rotting stump, helping Lila stumble into the woods as rain soaked their skin. Her good eye spotted a shed 50 yards in, its tin roof sagging under years of neglect, and she kicked the door open, ushering Lila inside. The air was musty, thick with the scent of mold and gasoline from a rusted can in the corner, and a splintered table held a tangle of tools, a hammer glinting among them. Nia sank against the wall, her torn blazer snagging on a nail, and caught her breath, pain blurring her vision as she rubbed her wrists, still raw from the cuffs she'd picked free in the basement cell. Lila slumped beside her, rain dripping from her bun, and pointed to a dusty PC in the corner, its monitor cracked but glowing faintly as she flipped it on. "Library hookup," she muttered, tapping the keys. "Wi-Fi's spotty, but it works." Nia's heart leapt, a flicker of hope piercing the dread as she limped to the machine, her fingers trembling over the keyboard, blood smearing the keys from her cut palms. She logged into a DOJ backup site, her training cutting through the haze, and pulled up a secondary file on Brant's corruption, a dossier she'd compiled after a tip linked Hollow Pines to a trafficking ring she'd busted last year. Names flashed: Vernon Holt, Judge Harold Crane, payoffs buried in shell companies all tied to Brant's badge. She typed a frantic email to Darius, attaching the file, her good eye darting to the shed's cracked window as shadows shifted outside, rain streaking the glass. "Dahlia Jackson, Hollow Pines," she wrote, her voice a whisper as she narrated. "Framed, beaten, hunted. Feds needed now. Evidence attached." The upload bar crawled, each second a hammer on her nerves, and she hit send, the chime a fragile victory as Lila gripped her shoulder, her breath hitching. "Darius got it," Nia said, leaning back, her chest heaving as she met Lila's gaze. "Confirmed feds are 2 hours out." Lila exhaled a shaky nod, and Nia let herself believe she'd outmaneuvered them, turned the mob's fire into a signal for rescue. She'd dodged their torches, sent proof to rip their lies apart, and now she just had to hold on. The shed's silence wrapped around them, rain drumming the roof, and Lila rummaged through a crate, pulling out a stale granola bar, splitting it between them. Nia chewed, the dry crumbs sticking in her throat, and flexed her bruised hands, pain sharpening her resolve. 2 hours, she thought, a lifeline she could cling to until a low growl cut the air. Not thunder, but dogs barking, their howls slicing through the woods like a blade. Nia stumbled to the window, her thigh buckling as she peered out and saw them. 3 hounds bounding through the pines, their teeth flashing in the rain, led by a man in a leather jacket, his shaved head gleaming under a hand-held spotlight. Jace Kincaid, a bounty hunter she'd glimpsed in court files, Vernon's cousin by marriage, a 6'5" ex-con with a rap sheet longer than her arm. His boots crunched pine cones, his rifle slung over his shoulder, and his gravelly voice barked orders to the dogs, their chains rattling as they sniffed the muddy trail. Nia's stomach dropped, adrenaline flooding her veins as she grabbed the hammer, shoving Lila behind the table. "He's here for me," she whispered, her good eye locked on Kincaid's silhouette, his spotlight sweeping closer, 30 yards, and shrinking. She'd sent the file, thought she'd bought time, but Brant's machine wouldn't let her breathe. The shed door burst open, wood splintering as Kincaid stormed in, his rifle raised, rain dripping from his jacket as the dogs snarled at his heels, their wet fur matting with mud. "Found you," he rumbled, his scarred face twisting into a grin, his spotlight blinding her good eye as she swung the hammer, aiming for his skull. He sidestepped, faster than his bulk suggested, and the rifle butt slammed into her shoulder, knocking her back against the wall. pain exploding where the chain had lashed her. Lila screamed, lunging with a wrench, but Kincaid kicked her aside, her thin frame crashing into the crate with a thud that rattled Nia's bones. She scrambled up, hammer raised, and charged, smashing it into his wrist. The crack of bone drowned by his roar as the rifle clattered to the floor. The dogs leapt, teeth snapping at her legs, and she kicked one back, its yelp piercing the shed as Kincaid drew a pistol with his good hand, his grin feral. "Brant's paying big," he snarled, leveling the gun at her chest, rain streaking his shaved head. "You're worth more dead." Nia dove behind the table, wood splintering as a bullet chewed through it, inches from her head, and rolled, grabbing the gasoline can, her hands slick with blood and fuel. She hurled it at him, the lid popping free, and gas splashed his jacket, the dogs yipping as it hit their muzzles. Kincaid fired again, the shot grazing her leg, a line of fire opening across her calf as she stumbled, blood soaking her sock. She lunged for the door, dragging Lila with her, and bolted into the swamp beyond the shed, reeds slapping her face as she plunged into ankle-deep muck, the barking closing in like a death knell. Kincaid's spotlight swept after her, his curses echoing as he limped forward, pistol raised, the dogs splashing through the water, their howls a chorus of doom. Nia pushed deeper, mud sucking her shoes, her leg pulsing with every step, Lila gasping beside her as they wove through cypress trees, their gnarled roots tripping her battered frame. The swamp swallowed the shed's glow, rain washing blood from her cuts, and she ducked behind a moss-draped trunk, her breath a ragged sob as the barking grew louder, 20 yards and closing. She'd outrun the mob, sent Darius the file, thought she'd turned the tide, only to face this primal hunt, a bullet in her leg and dogs on her heels. Her good eye scanned the dark, reeds rustling as Kincaid's spotlight flickered through the trees, his silhouette hulking against the rain-soaked night. She gripped Lila's hand, her voice a whisper. "Stay low," she said, but the barking was relentless, a promise of teeth and steel she couldn't outrun. "Drop a comment with number 1 if you reckon Nia's grit deserves a medal after dodging that mob and facing Kincaid's dogs, then hit like and subscribe to catch her next move. Has she got any tricks left to shake this hunter, or will the swamp become her tomb?" Nia Jackson staggered through the hollow pine swamp, reeds slicing her torn slacks as rain pounded her battered frame, her navy blazer a shredded ruin clinging to her bruised shoulders. Her swollen left eye throbbed, nearly sealed shut, and her right one burned with focus, darting through the cypress trees as Jace Kincaid's hounds howled 20 yards behind, their barking a relentless pulse in the dark. Blood seeped from the bullet graze on her calf, soaking her sock and mixing with the ankle-deep muck that sucked at her heels, each step a jolt of agony through her cracked ribs. Lila Moore clung to her arm, her raincoat flapping as she stumbled, her tight bun unraveling into wet strands plastered against her pale face, her breath a ragged sob over the storm's roar. Nia's good eye caught a glint ahead, a rusted tractor half sunk in the mire, and she veered toward it, dragging Lila into its shadow, mud caking their knees as they crouched low, reeds rustling around them. Kincaid's spotlight swept past, 10 yards off, his gravelly curses cutting through the rain as the dogs splashed closer, their chains clinking like a death knell. Nia's chest heaved, pain blurring her vision as she pressed Lila against the tractor's cold steel, her torn sleeve brushing the older woman's trembling shoulder. She'd emailed Darius Wells from the shed, thought she'd bought 2 hours until the feds arrived, but Kincaid's hunt had shattered that hope, his bullet a searing reminder of Brant's refusal to let her slip away. The barking grew louder, 5 yards now, and Nia's good eye widened as a shadow loomed through the reeds, not Kincaid's hulking frame, but a black man in his 50s, his overalls patched at the knees, his grey beard damp with rain. He carried a lantern, its soft glow slicing the gloom, and his voice rasped low as he knelt beside them. "You the one they're after?" Nia tensed, her hand tightening on Lila's, trussed a razor's edge after the mob's fire, but his eyes held weariness, not threat. "I'm Marcus Reed," he said, his tone steady. "Got a farm half a mile off, seen the dogs, heard the news. You need shelter." Nia's heart thudded, survival overriding doubt as the hound's howls closed in. 3 yards and shrinking. She nodded, wincing as Marcus helped her up, his grip firm on her bruised arm, and Lila followed. her raincoat snagging on a root as they hobbled through the swamp, reeds parting like a reluctant curtain. The trek was torture, every step a spike. Through her grazed leg, mud sucking her shoes as Marcus led them to a dirt path, his lantern swaying with each stride. The farm emerged from the dark, a sagging barn flanked by a clapboard house, its tin roof rattling under the rain, and Marcus ushered them inside the barn, the air thick with hay and manure, a single bulb flickering overhead. Nia collapsed against a hay bale, her breath a shuddering gasp, and Lila sank beside her, her hands trembling as she brushed wet hair from her face. Marcus bolted the door, his overalls dripping as he turned, his grey beard catching the light. "You're safe here," he said, pulling a CB radio from a crate. "I'll signal your people." Nia's good eye narrowed, relief mingling with caution as she rubbed her raw wrists, the cuffs marks still red beneath her torn sleeves. "I'm Nia," she rasped, her throat raw. "U.S. attorney. They're framing me, hunting me. Feds are coming, but I need to reach them." Marcus nodded, his face hardening as he tuned the radio, static crackling before a faint voice cut through, Darius's deep tone warped by interference. "Nia, you there?" She lunged for the mic, pain lancing her ribs as she gripped it, her voice hoarse but steady. "Darius, Hollow Pines Farm, off the swamp. Kincaid's after me. Brant's men burned the motel. File sent. Feds need to move." "Fast?" Darius cursed, his words sharp. "Got it. 2 hours out, pushing through red tape. Stay put." The line clicked off, and Nia exhaled, a fragile hope steadying her as Marcus gave a thumbs up, his lantern casting shadows across the barn's warped planks. She leaned back, her leg pulsing, blood soaking the hay as Lila tore a strip from her raincoat, wrapping it around the greys with shaking hands. "You'll make it," Lila whispered, her voice a thread of steel, and Nia nodded, letting her body rest, pain a distant hum as she closed her good eye. She dodged Kincaid's dogs, found sanctuary, confirmed Darius's approach, and now she could breathe, believing she'd outsmarted Brant's machine for a moment. Marcus paced near the door, his boots scuffing the dirt floor, and Nia's mind drifted, replaying the gas station, the trial, the fire, each blow a brick in the wall she'd tear down when the feds arrived. The barn's silence pressed in. Rain, drumming the roof, and she flexed her bruised hands, resolve hardening her spine. 2 hours, she thought, a countdown to justice until the door creaked open. Marcus slipping back in, his lantern dimmed, his face tight with something new. Nia's good eye snapped open as Brant's hulking frame filled the doorway, his khaki uniform pristine despite the rain, his Confederate pin glinting as he stepped inside, followed by Kincaid, his leather jacket soaked, his wrist swollen from her hammer blow. Nia's stomach dropped, adrenaline flooding her veins as she staggered up, her leg buckling under the graze's sting. "Marcus," she rasped, her voice breaking, but he wouldn't meet her gaze, his grey beard dipping as he shuffled back, hands in his pockets. Brant's hazel eyes blazed, his grin a slash of malice as he loomed closer, his boots thudding on the dirt. "Thought you'd slip us, huh?" he growled, his voice thick with triumph. "Marcus here's smarter than that." Kincaid cracked his knuckles, his pistol gleaming at his hip, and Nia's good eye darted to Marcus, realization crashing over her like ice water. "You sold me out," she spat, her voice a steel edge as Lila gasped, clutching the hay bale. Marcus flinched, his voice low, barely audible over the rain. "They'd take my land," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the floor. $50 and a promise, had no choice. Nia's chest heaved, fury drowning her pain as Brant laughed, a guttural bark that echoed off the barn's walls. "Loyalties, cheap round here," he said, pulling a knife from his belt, its blade glinting in the bulb's flicker. "You poked the wrong bear, princess." He nodded to Kincaid, who grabbed Lila, shoving her against the wall as she shrieked, her raincoat tearing under his grip. Brant seized Nia's arm, twisting it behind her, pain searing her shoulder as he dragged her to a tractor parked in the barn's corner, its rusted frame looming like a guillotine. Kincaid tossed him a chain, its links clinking, as Brant looped it around her wrists, yanking it tight until the metal bit into her raw skin, blood welling beneath her torn sleeves. Nia struggled, her legs screaming as she kicked at Brant, her heel glancing off his shin, but he slammed her against the tractor, the impact jarring her cracked ribs until she gasped, blood bubbling in her throat. "Time to learn your place," he snarled, his breath hot on her neck as he pressed the knife to her forearm, the blade's edge cold against her skin. He carved slowly, a jagged slur slicing into her flesh. Trouble, etched in crimson as blood dripped onto the dirt, her vision swimming with pain. She bit her lip, stifling a scream, her good eye locked on his, defiance burning through the agony as Lila sobbed, Kincaid's pistol jammed against her temple. "Feds won't save you," Brant said, stepping back, wiping the blade on his sleeve, his grin widening as he admired his work. "Not tonight." Naya's arm pulsed, blood soaking her slacks as the chain held her fast, the tractor's steel cold against her back. Kincaid released Lila, shoving her to the floor, and she crawled to the hay, her sobs a broken rhythm in the barn's gloom. Nia's mind raced, replaying Marcus's call, the radio's crackle, her fleeting hope of sanctuary now ashes like her motel hideout. She'd trusted him, thought she'd won a breath before the feds arrived, only to land in this trap, her flesh marked by Brant's hate, a betrayal sharper than Kincaid's bullet. Her good eye glared at Marcus. His shoulders slumped as he backed toward the door, and she spat blood onto the dirt, her voice a hoarse rasp. "You're next," she said, her words a vow despite the chain's bite. Brant chuckled, sheathing, the knife as Kincaid loomed beside him, his dogs barking outside, their howls a promise of more. The barn door slammed shut, Marcus slipping out as Brant and Kincaid lingered, their shadows stretching across the dirt floor. Nia's arm throbbed, the slur a burning scar, her body a wreck of bruises and cuts, but her mind clung to Darius, 2 hours out, fighting to reach her. She'd dodged the swamp, survived the hunt, only to be sold out by a man she'd thought was her shield. Brant's knife had carved her flesh, his chain bound her hope, and now she was a prisoner again, worse off than the basement cell. The bulb flickered, casting their grins in stark relief, and Nia flexed her chained hands, testing the links, her spirit refusing to snap. They thought they'd broken her, silenced her fight, but every move they made was a spark she'd turn against them when the time came. Nia Jackson slumped against the rusted tractor in Marcus Reed's barn, her wrists bleeding beneath the chains that Sheriff Amos Brant had cinched tight, the cold metal biting into the raw welts left by her earlier cuffs. Her navy blazer was a tattered rag, soaked with rain and blood from the swamp chase, and her slacks clung to her bruised legs, stiff with mud and crimson from the bullet graze on her calf. Pain seared her forearm where Brant had carved trouble with his knife, the jagged slur pulsing with every heartbeat, and her cracked ribs throbbed as she drew shallow breaths, the barn's musty air thick with hay and the tang of her own blood. Her swollen left eye was a bruised slit, but her right one burned with defiance, glaring at Brant's hulking frame as he loomed near the door, his khaki uniform pristine despite the night's chaos, his Confederate pin glinting in the flickering bulb's light. Jace Kincaid stood beside him, his leather jacket dripping, his swollen wrist a testament to her hammer blow, and Lila Moore cowered in the hay, her raincoat torn, her sobs a broken rhythm against the rain drumming the tin roof. Nia's mind churned, replaying Marcus's betrayal, the Fed's 2-hour delay and every blow since the gas station, her spirit a steel thread refusing to snap. Her good eye caught a rusted nail jutting from the tractor's frame, its tip glinting, faintly in the dimness, and she shifted, her chains clinking as she stretched her trembling fingers toward it, pain lancing her shoulder where Kincaid had struck her. Brant paced, his boots scuffing the dirt, muttering to Kincaid about cleaning up before sunrise, his hazel eyes flicking to her with a grin that promised more. Nia's legal mind steadied her, years of training overriding the agony as she worked the nail free, its jagged edge scraping her palm until it slipped into her grip, a slim chance in the gloom. She twisted it into the chain's lock, her movements slow, masked by Lila's whimpers and the rain's roar, each scrape a whisper of freedom. Brant turned, his knife sheathed, and Nia froze, her good eye locked on his. But he smirked, oblivious, barking at Kincaid to check the dogs outside, their barking a distant howl through the storm. The lock clicked, the chain falling loose with a soft thud into the hay, and Nia rubbed her wrists, blood slicking her fingers as she stood, wobbly but alive. She lunged for a pitchfork leaning against the wall, its tines rusted but sharp, and swung it at Kincaid as he re-entered. The metal, grazing his arm as he cursed, stumbling back. Brant charged, his fist aimed at her jaw, but she ducked, driving the pitchfork's handle into his gut, the air whooshing out of him as he doubled over, his pin clattering to the dirt. Lila scrambled up, grabbing a shovel, and swung wildly, the blade clipping Kincaid's shoulder as he roared, blood seeping through his jacket. Nia bolted for the barn's side door, her legs screaming with every step, and kicked it open, rain soaking her anew as she stumbled into the dark, Lila panting behind her. The farm's rusted pickup sat 10 yards off, its keys dangling in the ignition. A stroke of luck Marcus hadn't stripped away, and Nia hot-wired it with trembling hands, the engine sputtering to life as Kincaid's shouts echoed from the barn. "She's loose!" Nia floored it, tires spinning on wet dirt as she tore down the path, Lila gripping the seat, her raincoat flapping as the barn shrank in the rear view, Brant's hulking silhouette bursting out too late. Rain streaked the cracked windshield, her good eye scanning the road as she veered toward Hollow Pines Town Square, her mind blazing with a reckless plan. She'd dodged Kincaid's dogs, survived Marcus's sellout, and now she'd take the fight to them, crash their smug victory with the truth they couldn't bury. The courthouse loomed ahead, its brick facade lit by torchlight from a crowd gathered on the steps, their chants swelling over the storm as Judge Harold Crane stood. At a podium, his grey hair slicked back, his cold blue eyes glinting as he addressed them mid-speech, his voice booming through a megaphone. "We'll root out this threat," he declared, the crowd cheering, bats and chains waving in their hands. A lynch mob fed by Brant's lies. Nia swerved the pickup into the square, tires screeching as she slammed the brakes, the truck skidding. To a halt 10 feet from the steps, mud splashing the crowd as they turned, their faces twisting with rage. She leapt out, her leg buckling under the graze's sting, and ripped her U.S. Attorney badge from her blazer's inner pocket, its gold shield glinting in the torchlight as she held it high, her voice cutting through the rain like a blade. "I'm Nia Jackson, U.S. Attorney," she shouted, her tone steady despite the blood dripping from her arm, the slur trouble a stark accusation against Crane's bench. Gasps rippled through the crowd, heads whipping toward her, mouths dropping open as Crane froze, his gavel hovering mid-air, his smirk faltering into a scowl. "You've been lied to," she roared, her good eye blazing. "Brant framed me, Crane rigged my trial, I've got proof, and the feds are coming." The square erupted, shouts clashing in shock and fury, a woman in the back screaming, "She's lying," while a man near the front muttered, "Ain't no way," his torch dipping as doubt flickered in his eyes. Nia's chest heaved, her ribs shrieking as she stood tall, the badge a beacon in the storm, and for a moment she thought she'd reclaimed power, turned their hate into chaos. Deputies flanked Crane, their hands on holsters, hesitating as the crowd's roar swelled, bats lowering in confusion. She'd stunned them, flipped their script, and the square teetered on the edge of revolt, her truth a crack in their wall of lies. Lila climbed from the truck, her shovel raised, a silent ally at Nia's side, and Nia's pulse quickened, believing she'd lit a spark that Brant couldn't douse. Then a sharp crack split the air, not thunder, but a gunshot, and pain seared her shoulder, a bullet grazing her flesh as she stumbled, blood welling hot under her blazer. Nia's good eye darted upward, spotting a sniper on the courthouse roof, his rifle glinting as he reloaded, a shadow in a black cap against the rain-soaked sky. Crane's voice boomed, "She's a threat!" His gavel slamming the podium as he pointed at her, his cold eyes glinting with malice. "Take her down!" The crowd surged, their doubts swallowed by rage, bats swinging as they charged, a woman in a stained apron hurling a brick that smashed the truck's windshield. Nia dove behind a stone fountain, her shoulder pulsing, blood soaking her sleeve as Lila scrambled after her, the shovel clattering to the pavement. The square spun into a riot, boots pounding, torches arcing through. The air and Nia's mind raced, replaying her stand. The badge, the shout, the stunned silence before the shot. She'd rocked them, thought she'd won a breath, only to ignite this. a sniper's bullet and a mob's fury dwarfing the barn's chains. She pressed against the fountain, mud and blood slicking her hands as she tore a strip from her blazer, wrapping her shoulder, pain blurring her vision. The crowd's chants grew feral, "Get her!" echoing over the rain's drumbeat, and Naya's good eye caught Crane smirking from the steps, his gavel raised like a king commanding an execution. Deputies joined the fray, their batons swinging as they closed in, and Lila clutched her arm, her voice a whisper. "We're trapped," she said, but Nia shook her head, her spirit iron despite the chaos. She'd crashed their party, stunned. Them with her title, and even with a bullet in her shoulder, she'd planted a seed they couldn't uproot. The sniper's scope glinted again, a red dot dancing on the fountain's edge, and Nia braced herself knowing this wasn't the end, not yet. Drop a comment with number 1 if you think Nia's badge reveal was the gutsiest move she could have pulled in that square, then hit like and subscribe to see her next play. Did that sniper just seal her fate, or can she turn this riot into her redemption? Nia Jackson crouched behind the stone fountain in Hollow Pines Town Square, rain hammering her battered shoulders as blood seeped from the sniper's graze on her arm, soaking the shredded remains of her navy blazer. Her slacks were torn at the knees, mud-caking her bruised legs, and her swollen left eye pulsed, a bruised slit against the chaos of the riot erupting around her. Her right eye burned with focus, darting through the mob's swinging bats and arcing torches, their chants of "Get her!" a feral roar over the storm's drumbeat. Lila Moore huddled beside her, her raincoat flapping as she clutched the fountain's edge, her tight bun a wet tangle streaking her pale face with grey strands. Nia's cracked ribs screamed with every breath, the slur "trouble" carved into her forearm, a throbbing accusation, but her U.S. attorney badge still gleamed in her fist, its gold shield a defiant spark against Judge Harold Crane's gavel slamming the podium 10 yards away. The sniper's red dot danced on the fountain's rim, a second shot cracking the stone inches from her head, and Nia's good eye narrowed, her mind racing as the crowd surged, boots pounding the muddy pavement, their hate a living thing she'd unleashed with her courtroom crash. She tore another strip from her blazer, wrapping her bleeding shoulder with trembling hands, pain blurring her vision as Lila whispered, "They're closing in," her voice a thread of panic. Nia gritted her teeth, her legal mind a steel lifeline cataloguing the chaos. Crane's smirk, the deputy's batons, the mob's fury sparked by her badge reveal. She'd stunned them, thought she'd turned their lies into doubt, only to ignite this bloodbath, a sniper's bullet dwarfing the barn's chains. Then headlights flared, cutting through the rain-soaked dark. Not one but 3 black vans roaring into the square, their tires screeching as they skidded to a halt, mud splashing the mob's legs. Federal agents spilled out, their vests marked. FBI in bold white, rifles raised as they shouted, "Stand down!" over the crowd's roar, and Nia's heart leapt, relief flooding her chest as she spotted Darius Wells leaping from the lead van, his suit rumpled, his DOJ badge glinting. Under the torchlight, "Darius!" Nia rasped, staggering up, her leg buckling under the bullet graze as she waved her badge, rain streaking her bloodied face. He sprinted toward her, his 6-foot frame shoving through the mob, his deep voice booming. "Nia, hold on!" Agents flanked him, their weapons trained on the deputies who froze, batons mid-swing, as Crane bellowed from the steps, "This is my jurisdiction!" His gavel useless against the Fed's advance. Darius reached her, pulling her from the fountain's shadow, his grip steady on her bruised arm as Lila scrambled after them, her shovel lost in the mud. "You're safe," he said, his eyes blazing, with fury as he took in her wounds, the slur on her arm, the blood soaking her slacks. "We got your file, cracked the red tape. Brant's done." Nia nodded, her chest heaving, and handed him a hidden audio recorder from her blazer's torn lining, its red light blinking faintly, a backup of Brant's threats she'd switched. "On in the barn. Everything's there," she said, her voice hoarse but firm, rain dripping from her braids as she leaned on him, pain a distant hum. "Vernon, Crane, the payoffs. Get it to D.C." Darius slipped the recorder into his pocket, his jaw tight as he barked orders, agents cuffing deputies and parting the mob, their torches dropping into puddles with hisses of steam. Crane's face paled, his grey hair plastered to his skull, as he backed toward the courthouse doors, but an agent seized him, snapping cuffs on his wrists as the crowd's chants faltered into stunned murmurs. Naya's good eye locked on Brant's hulking silhouette storming from a side street, his khaki uniform soaked, his Confederate pin glinting as he shouted, "She's a fugitive," only to freeze as agents swarmed him, rifles aimed at his chest. She thought she'd won, the feds her cavalry, justice crashing through Hollow Pine's rotting core, and her knees nearly buckled with the weight of survival. Darius guided her to a van, its back doors gaping, and helped her inside, the vinyl seat cool against her torn clothes as Lila climbed in beside her, her raincoat dripping onto the floor. "You're a damn tank," Darius said, clapping her shoulder, pain flaring where the sniper had grazed her, but she grinned, faint and fierce, believing it was over. Agents dragged Brant into another van, his hazel eyes blazing with rage as he thrashed, cuffs clinking, and Crane slumped in a third, his gavel lost in the mud. The square cleared, the mob scattering under the feds' glare, and Nia's good eye caught a state trooper approaching, his uniform crisp despite the rain, a lanky white man in his 30s with a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his unreadable face. He leaned into the van, his badge reading Trooper Ellis, and nodded at Darius, his voice steady. "Heard the alerts," he said, his hand resting near his holster but not drawing. "She's hurt bad. I'll take her in, keep her safe. Till it's sorted." Nia tensed, her good eye narrowing as Darius hesitated, rain streaking his suit, but he nodded, trusting the trooper's calm. "Good," he said, stepping back. "Feds are tied up securing the scene. Get her to a holding, point neutral ground." Ellis opened the passenger door, his grip iron as he helped Nia out, her leg pulsing with every step, and she sank into his cruiser, the seat warm against her soaked frame. Lila stayed behind, an agent wrapping her in a blanket, and Nia handed Ellis the recorder, her fingers shaking as blood dripped onto the dashboard. "This ties Brant to Crane, Vernon too," she rasped, her voice a steel thread. "Get it to the DOJ, Darius Wells. They're coming for me." Ellis took it, slipping it into his pocket with a nod, his face blank. "Sounds heavy," he said, starting the engine. "I'll pass it along." The cruiser rolled forward, rain, drumming the roof, and Nia's tension eased a fraction. Ellis's calm a stark contrast to Brant's venom, Kincaid's snarls. She leaned back, her body screaming for rest, believing she'd surrendered on her terms. The recorder a weapon to bury them when the feds regrouped. The road stretched dark, pines looming on either side, their branches swaying in the storm, and Ellis turned off the main drag, gravel crunching under the tires as the path narrowed, trees pressing closer until they rolled into a clearing. A squat warehouse loomed ahead, its corrugated walls rusted and pocked, no lights piercing the gloom, just shadows swallowing the rain. Nia's gut tightened, her good eye flicking to Ellis as the cruiser stopped, his calm cracking into something colder, his hand twitching toward his holster. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice sharp, pain snapping her focus back. Ellis killed the engine, his face hardening as he yanked her door open, rain soaking her anew as he pulled her out, his grip bruising her grazed shoulder. "Welcome to the party," he said, tossing the recorder to a figure stepping from the warehouse. Brant's hulking frame unmistakable, his khaki uniform pristine, his grin a slash of malice as he caught it, rain streaking his buzzed grey hair. Nia stumbled, disbelief crashing into fury as Ellis shoved her forward, her good eye blazing. "You're one of them," she spat, her voice a steel edge as Brant loomed closer. Kincaid emerging behind him, his leather jacket dripping, his pistol gleaming at his hip. "State's got no pull here," Ellis said, shrugging, no remorse in his tone. "Brant pays better." Kincaid laughed, cracking his swollen wrist as Brant held up the recorder, its red light dead, and crushed it under his boot, grinding it into the mud with a crunch that echoed in the clearing. Nia's chest heaved, rage drowning her pain as Brant seized her arm, twisting it until she bit back a scream, her ribs shrieking against the strain. "Thought your Fed pals would save you," he growled, his breath hot on her face, his Confederate pin glinting as he dragged her toward the warehouse doors. "They're too late, stuck in red tape." Kincaid flanked him, his dogs barking from a crate nearby, and Ellis followed, his hat shadowing his smirk as they shoved her inside, the air stale and heavy with rust and oil. Nia's legs scraped the dirt floor as Brandt threw her into a corner, her body slamming against a rusted pipe, pain exploding where the sniper had grazed her. She scrambled up, mud and blood slicking her hands, but Ellis drew his taser, its prongs crackling as he aimed it at her chest, his voice a low hiss. "Move, and you're done." The taser fired, electricity surging through her, her muscles seizing as she collapsed, her good eye rolling back, pain a white-hot storm drowning her senses. Brandt loomed over her, his boots squelching in the damp dirt, and barked at Kincaid. "Get her out of sight." Kincaid hauled her up, her body limp as he dragged her to a van parked inside, its back doors gaping, and tossed her in, the thud jarring her cracked ribs as the doors slammed shut, plunging her into shadow. The engine rumbled, gravel crunching. As they sped off and Nia's mind spun, replaying the Fed's arrival, Darius's grip, her fleeting triumph now ash. Ellis had swapped the recorder, freed Brandt, turned her surrender into a trap, and now she was gone. Dumped in a quarry as the van jolted over potholes, each bump a reminder of the betrayal she hadn't seen coming. Her good eye fluttered open, rain seeping through a crack in the roof, and she flexed her numb hands, resolve flickering through the haze. They'd taken her win, but she wasn't broken yet. Nia Jackson jolted awake in the back of a rusted van, her body slamming against the metal floor as it rattled over hollow pines' uneven back roads, rain seeping through a cracked roof to drip onto her bruised face. Her navy blazer was a shredded ruin, soaked with blood and mud, and her slacks clung to her legs, stiff with grime from the swamp chase and the sniper's graze on her shoulder. Her wrists ached, bound tight with coarse rope that Sheriff Amos Brandt had knotted after Trooper Ellis's taser dropped her in the warehouse, the fibers cutting into the raw welts where chains had held her in Marcus's barn. Pain seared her. Forearm the slur trouble, carved by Brandt's knife pulsing with every heartbeat, and her cracked ribs screamed as she shifted, the van's jolts a fresh torment to her battered frame. Her swollen left eye throbbed, a bruised slit, but her right one flickered open, adjusting to the dimness as gravel pinged the undercarriage, each sound a countdown to whatever Brandt had planned after snatching her from the Fed's grasp. Her good eye darted to the doors, locked tight, and she flexed her numb hands, rope biting deeper as she tested the knots, her legal mind clawing through the haze of pain and exhaustion. She'd thought Darius Wells and the Feds had saved her in the square, her recorder a lifeline to Barry Brandt and Judge Harold Crane, only to be betrayed by Ellis, a state trooper on Brandt's payroll who'd swapped her evidence for a blank and dumped her into this trap. The van slowed, tires crunching to a stop, and Nia's stomach twisted as the doors swung open, Brandt's hulking frame filling the gap, his khaki uniform pristine despite the rain, his Confederate pin glinting as he loomed over her. Jace Kincaid flanked him, his leather jacket dripping, his swollen wrist a faint trophy from her hammer blow, and his pistol gleamed at his hip, a silent promise of worse. "Rise and shine, princess," Brandt growled, his hazel eyes blazing with malice as he yanked her out, his grip bruising her grazed shoulder, rain soaking her anew as she stumbled into a quarry's muddy clearing, its steep walls towering like a grave under the storm-dark sky. Nia's legs buckled, mud sucking at her torn shoes, but she steadied herself, pain sharpening her focus as Kincaid doused her with gasoline from a red can, the acrid stench choking her lungs as it soaked her, blazer and slacks stinging the cuts on her palms. Brandt pulled a camcorder from the van, setting it on a tripod, its red light blinking as he aimed it at her, his grin a slash of venom. "Time to confess," he said, his voice low and thick, pressing a knife to her throat, the blade's edge, cold against her skin. "Say you attacked Vernon, escaped, burned the motel, all of it, or you don't leave this hole." Nia's chest heaved, the rope biting her wrists as gasoline fumes burned her eyes, her good eye locked on the lens, a ticking clock she couldn't outrun. She'd faced death before, stared down cartel hitmen, but this was personal, a staged execution to seal her fate and bury Darius's fight. Her mind raced, searching for a crack, and she nodded, the blade digging deeper as she swallowed, her throat dry with fear and fury. Kincaid hit record, the camcorder humming as Brant stepped back, arms folded, his boots squelching in the mud. Nia stared into the lens, her voice hoarse but steady, rain streaking her bloodied face. "I'm Nia Jackson," she rasped, her words a deliberate strike. "They're forcing this. I didn't assault anyone, didn't escape, didn't burn anything. Brant's corrupt, tied to Crane, framing me to cover it." Brant cursed, lunging forward, but she kept going, her good eye blazing. "DOJ's coming. Check their accounts, their lies. This is their script, not mine." She slipped in a code, blue dawn rising, a signal from an old case Darius would catch, a plea to dig deeper when this tape surfaced. Kincaid's fist slammed into her jaw, the crack of bone on bone drowning her words as she staggered, blood spraying from her lip. But she'd planted the seed, a spark they couldn't edit out. "Cut it!" Brant roared, his face darkening as he grabbed the camcorder, rewinding the tape, his breath hot with rage. "She's playing us," Kincaid snarled, his pistol raised, rain streaking his shaved head as he limped closer, his swollen wrist trembling. "Smart but dead smart." Brant nodded, tossing the camera aside, its tripod sinking into the mud, and seized the gasoline can, splashing it around her in a wide ring, the puddle glistening under the van's headlights. "We'll fix it," he said, his voice a guttural hiss. "Make it sing our tune." He flicked a lighter from his pocket, its flame flaring bright against the rain, and Nia's heart slammed against her ribs, her good eye darting to the rope, her legal mind screaming for an out as the fire danced in his hand. She'd thought she'd turned the tables, used their own tool against them, but they'd twist it, burn her alive to sell the lie. Nia twisted her wrists, the rope fraying against a jagged rock she'd palmed from the quarry floor, its edge cutting into her palm as she worked it free, pain a distant hum against the gasoline sting. Brant tossed the lighter into the puddle, flames erupting with a roar that swallowed her gasp, a ring of fire trapping her as heat seared her legs, blistering her skin through the soaked slacks. She lunged, rolling through the blaze, her blazer, igniting as she hit the mud beyond, the flames licking her back as she smothered them, her good eye watering from the smoke. Kincaid charged, his pistol aimed, but she swung the rock shard, its edge slashing his thigh, blood spurting as he howled, collapsing into the muck with a splash that doused the fire's edge. Brant roared, "Get her!" his knife flashing as he leapt through the dying flames, his boots slipping in the wet earth. Nia scrambled up, her leg pulsing from the graze, her shoulder a throbbing mess as she dodged Brant's blade, the tip grazing, her side a fresh line of blood welling under her ribs. She stumbled toward the van, her good eye spotting the keys in the ignition, a reckless chance she couldn't miss. Brant grabbed her ankle, yanking her back, but she kicked free, her heel cracking his nose, blood spraying as he reeled, his Confederate pin glinting in the firelight. She dove into the van, slamming the door as Kincaid fired, the bullet pinging, off the frame inches from her head, and she turned the key, the engine sputtering to life as Brant lunged, his knife scraping the window. She floored it, tires spinning on mud as she tore from the quarry. The camcorder's red light fading in the rear view, Brant's shouts lost to the rain's roar. The van jolted over potholes, rain streaking the windshield as Nia gripped the wheel, her burned hands slick with blood and gasoline, her body a wreck of blisters and cuts. She'd broken free, stabbed Kincaid, thought she'd flipped their script with the confession, only to face this fiery trap, a televised horror show dwarfing Ellis's betrayal. Her good eye darted to the road, the quarry shrinking behind her, flames flickering in the dark as Brant's voice crackled through a radio on the dash. "She's loose, broadcast it live." She slammed the radio off, her chest heaving as smoke curled from her blazer, the stench of burned flesh stinging her nose. She'd survived their execution, turned their tape into a weapon, but Brant's order echoed in her skull, a promise to spin her escape into a deeper lie. Nia veered onto a side path, headlights off to dodge pursuit, her leg trembling as blood soaked her sock, dizziness clawing her vision. The feds were out there, Darius fighting to reach her, but Brant's machine was relentless, and now she was a ghost on borrowed time, her confession a double-edged blade they'd wield against her. She'd thought she'd won a breath, stabbed, Kincaid to break free, only to ignite this a live broadcast of her suicide to bury her truth. The van rattled, its engine groaning as she pushed deeper into the night, rain washing her wounds, and her good eye scanned the horizon, searching for a lifeline. She'd clawed out of their fire, but the hunt wasn't over, and Brant's next move loomed like a shadow she couldn't shake. Nia Jackson gripped the steering wheel of the rusted van, her burned hands trembling as she tore through Hollow Pines back roads, rain streaking the cracked windshield and washing blood from the jagged cuts on her palms. Her navy blazer smoldered, a tattered ruin singed by the quarry's flames, and her slacks clung to her bruised legs, stiff with mud and gasoline, the bullet graze on her calf pulsing with every jolt of the uneven path. Pain seared her forearm where Sheriff Amos Brant had carved trouble, the slur a throbbing scar, and her cracked ribs shrieked as she swerved, dodging potholes that rattled the van's groaning frame. Her swollen left eye was a bruised slit, but her right one burned with focus, scanning the dark as headlights flickered off to evade pursuit, the quarry's fire a fading glow in the rear view. She'd rolled through Brant's blaze, stabbed Jace Kincaid with a rock shard, and smashed his camcorder into his face, streaming her truth to thousands before collapsing, believing she'd flipped their script, only to hear Brant's radio crackle, "Broadcast it live!" as she sped away, a promise to twist her escape into a deeper lie. The van's engine coughed its sputter a warning as Nia veered onto a narrow trail, reeds slapping the hood, her good eye darting to the fuel gauge hovering near empty. Her chest heaved, smoke curling from her blazer, as the stench of burned flesh stung her nose, a grim reminder of the ring of fire she'd barely survived. She'd thought she'd turned the tables, used their own tape to expose Brant's corruption, her coded Blue Dawn rising a beacon for Darius Wells at the DOJ, but Brant's order echoed in her skull, a live feed of her suicide now, poisoning the airwaves. The road widened, Hollow Pines town square looming ahead, its brick courthouse lit by torchlight from a crowd still buzzing after her badge reveal, their chants a distant hum over the rain's drumbeat. She slammed the brakes, tires skidding as she stopped 50 yards from the chaos, mud splashing the windshield, and her good eye caught Judge Harold Crane on the steps, his grey hair slicked back, his voice booming through a megaphone to rally. The mob, their bats and chains waving like a war cry. Nia stumbled out, her leg buckling under the graze's sting, pain blurring her vision as she gripped the van's door, rain soaking her anew. Her U.S. attorney badge glinted in her fist, a battered shield she'd wielded to stun them, and she limped forward, mud sucking at her torn shoes, her mind blazing with a reckless plan. She'd crashed their square once, thought she'd won, a breath only to face a sniper's bullet. Now she'd do it again, turn their broadcast into her weapon. The crowd's roar swelled as she neared, their faces twisting with rage, a man in a soaked cap hurling a rock that grazed her shoulder, blood welling hot where the sniper had struck. She ducked behind a lamppost, its flickering light casting her shadow across the pavement, and spotted Crane mid-speech, his cold blue eyes glinting as he shouted, "She's a fugitive, a threat to our town!" The mob cheering, their torches, a sea of fire against the storm. Nia lunged, her legs screaming as she tackled a deputy on the fringe, wrenching his radio from his belt, its static crackling as she tuned it to WHPM, Crane's brother's station, the same one that had smeared her as a cop killer. She smashed the mic against the pavement, her good eye locked on Crane as she shouted, "This is Nia Jackson, U.S. Attorney," her voice hoarse but piercing, broadcasting live to thousands as the crowd froze, heads whipping toward her. "Brant staged my death, Crane rigged my trial. I've got proof streaming now, check their lies." She dove for a news van parked 10 yards off, its antenna buzzing with the live feed, and slammed her badge against the window, the gold shield flashing in the camera's glare as a reporter shrieked, "She's alive!" The mob faltered, bats, lowering as murmurs rippled through them, Crane's gavel slamming the podium in vain, his face paling as the broadcast spun out of his grasp. Nia's chest heaved, rain washing blood from her cuts as she staggered back, her good eye blazing with triumph, believing she'd won, turned their own airwaves against them. The crowd's chants fractured, a woman in a soaked scarf muttering, "What proof?" while a man near the van dropped his torch, doubt etching his weathered face. She'd streamed her truth, thought she'd cracked their machine, her collapse in the quarry now a rallying cry as viewers rioted online, Darius's phone surely buzzing with the fallout. Then a roar cut the air. Not rain or rage, but a truck's engine screaming from a side street, Brandt's black pickup barreling into the square, its grille gleaming as he leapt out, his khaki uniform soaked, his Confederate pin a taunt as he charged her, tackling her into the mud with a thud that jarred her cracked ribs. Nia gasped, pain exploding as Brandt pinned her, his fist slamming into her jaw, blood spraying onto the pavement as the crowd surged anew, their doubt swallowed by his roar. "She's a liar," he bellowed, his hazel eyes wild, yanking her up by the blazer as Kincaid stormed in, his leather jacket torn, his thigh bleeding from her shard, a shotgun in his good hand. Crane seized the moment, his voice booming, "She's a terrorist!" His gavel raised as he nodded to a militia pouring from the courthouse, 10 men in camo wielding rifles, their boots pounding the steps. Nia struggled, her leg pulsing, but Brandt dragged her toward a makeshift gallows on the lawn, its noose swaying in the rain, a rope coiled like a snake ready to strike. The militia flanked her, rifles aimed at her chest, and the crowd cheered, their torches waving as Kincaid shoved Lila aside, her raincoat snagging on a bench as she fell. Her scream lost to the chaos. Nia's good eye darted to the noose, her burned hands flexing against Brandt's grip, pain a white-hot storm as the militia tightened their circle, the gallows shadow swallowing her. She'd broadcast her truth, thought she'd turned the tide, sparked a riot online that could reach Darius, only to face this, a lynching dwarfing the quarry's fire. Brandt yanked her onto the platform, the wood creaking under her weight, and looped the rope around her neck, its coarse fibers scraping her skin as he tightened it, his breath hot on her face. "You poked the bear," he snarled, his grin feral as Kincaid aimed the shotgun, its barrel glinting in the torchlight. Crane loomed behind, his gavel a scepter as he barked, "End her!" The crowd's roar a thunderclap that shook the square, their hate a tidal wave she couldn't outrun. Nia's mind raced, replaying the broadcast, the badge, the crash, every move she'd made to claw back power, now ashes as the noose bit her throat. She'd stunned them again, thought she'd won a breath, turned their own feed into a weapon, but they'd countered with this, a public execution to bury her truth under their cheers. Her good eye locked on Brandt, defiance burning through the haze as she spat blood onto his boots, her voice a rasp. "Feds'll bury you," she said, her words a vow despite the rope's choke. He laughed, stepping back as Kincaid cocked the shotgun, the click a death knell over the rain's drumbeat, and the militia raised their rifles, barrels glinting. As the crowd pressed closer, their faces a blur of rage and glee. Nia's leg trembled, her shoulder pulsing where the sniper had grazed her, and she flexed her burned hands, the rope fraying against her wrists as she twisted, a faint chance she couldn't reach. The gallows creaked, the noose tightening with every breath, and her good eye caught a flicker in the dark. Headlights beyond the square, too faint to be hope. She'd broadcast her stand, sparked chaos online, thought she'd lit a fire they couldn't douse, only to ignite this, a militia's guns and a town's hate dwarfing Brandt's knife. The rain thickened, washing blood from her face, and she braced herself, her spirit iron despite the noose's bite, knowing Darius was out. They're fighting to reach her, but the gallows loomed, a tomb she might not escape. Nia Jackson stood on the makeshift gallows in Hollow Pines town square, rain pounding her battered frame as the coarse noose scraped her neck, its fibers biting into her bruised skin with every shallow breath. Her navy blazer hung in charred, tatters soaked with blood and mud, and her slacks were shredded, clinging to her trembling legs, the bullet graze on her calf pulsing beneath the grime. Pain seared her forearm, where Sheriff Amos Brandt had carved trouble, the slur, a throbbing scar, and her cracked ribs shrieked as she shifted, the wooden platform creaking under her weight. Her swollen left eye was a bruised slit, but her right one burned with defiance, glaring at Brandt's hulking figure as he loomed beside her, his khaki uniform pristine despite the storm, his Confederate pin glinting in the torchlight. Jace Kincaid flanked him, his leather jacket torn, blood seeping from his thigh where her rock shard had struck, his shotgun aimed at her chest, its barrel a cold threat against the rain's roar. Judge Harold Crane stood on the courthouse steps 10 yards off, his grey hair plastered to his skull, his gavel raised as he barked, "End her!" To the militia, 10 camo-clad men with rifles trained on her, their boots sinking into the muddy lawn as the crowd cheered, their bats and torches a sea of hate swallowing the square. Naya's chest heaved, her burned hands flexing against the rope binding her wrists. Pain a white-hot storm as the noose tightened, her good eye darting to the militia's glinting barrels, each a promise of death she'd dodged too many times. She'd broadcast her truth from the news van, crashed the square with her badge, thought she'd sparked a riot online to reach Darius Wells at the DOJ, only to ignite this, a lynching dwarfing the quarry's fire. Brant's fist had slammed. Her jaw Kincaid's militia had swarmed, and now she was here, a breath from the end, her stand a spark they'd smother with her blood. The rain washed crimson streaks from her face, her leg trembling under the graze's sting, and she spat onto the platform, her voice a hoarse rasp. "You're finished," she said, her words a vow despite the rope's choke, and Brant laughed, his hazel eyes wild as he stepped back, nodding to Kincaid. "Drop her!" he snarled, his grin feral as the crowd's roar swelled, a thunderclap shaking the night. The platform shuddered, the trapdoor beneath her creaking as Kincaid's finger twitched on the trigger, and Naya braced herself, her good eye catching a flicker beyond the square, headlights slicing the dark, too fast to be random. Then a roar split the air, not thunder or the crowd, but helicopter blades whirring. 3 black choppers swooping low over the courthouse, their floodlights, blinding the mob as federal agents rappelled down, rifles raised, their vests marked FBI in stark white. Darius Wells leapt from the lead chopper, his suit soaked, his DOJ badge glinting as he sprinted toward the gallows, his deep voice booming, "Stand down!" over the chaos. Nia's heart leapt, relief flooding her chest as agents swarmed the square, their shouts drowning the crowd's cheers. Rifles aimed at the militia, who froze, barrels dipping in confusion. Brant roared, lunging for the trapdoor lever. But Darius tackled him, pinning his arms as an agent cut Nia free, the rope falling loose with a thud that echoed in her skull. Nia stumbled off the platform, her leg buckling as the agent steadied, her rein washing the nooses mark from her neck, pain blurring her vision as Darius cuffed Brant, his khaki uniform muddied in the scuffle. "You're safe," Darius said, his eyes blazing with fury as he took in her wounds, the slur on her arm, the blood soaking her slacks. "We cracked your broadcast. Blue dawn rising. Feds moved fast." Nia nodded, her chest heaving, and sank to her knees, her good eye locked on Crane as agents seized him, his gavel clattering down the steps, his cold blue eyes wide with shock. The militia dropped their rifles, hands raised as agents swarmed, their camo no match for federal steel, and Kincaid fired a wild shot, the bullet pinging off a chopper as an agent tackled him, wrenching the shotgun free, his bloodied thigh a scarlet stain in the mud. Nia's body trembled, survival a fleeting triumph as she thought it was over. The feds her salvation, Brant's machine shattered in the square. Darius pulled her up, his grip steady on her bruised arm, and she leaned on him, pain a distant hum, as agents cleared the crowd, their torches hissing out in puddles, the square falling silent save for the chopper's whir. "You did it," he said, his voice tight, clapping her grazed shoulder, and she grinned, faint and fierce, believing justice had landed. Brant thrashed in cuffs, his hazel eyes promising vengeance as agents dragged him to a van, and Crane slumped beside him, a broken shell stripped of his throne. Lila Moore staggered from the bench, her raincoat torn, an agent wrapping her in a blanket as she sobbed, her tight bun a wet tangle against her pale face. Nia's good eye scanned the scene, mud and blood slicking her hands, her badge lost in the chaos, but her stand etched into the airwaves, a truth they couldn't bury. Then a crackle cut the silence, not gunfire, but a voice from an agent's radio, sharp and urgent. "Unit 1, we've got audio intercepted from Crane's office. Patching it now." Nia froze, her good eye narrowing as the static cleared, and Crane's voice spilled out, tinny but unmistakable. "If she takes us down, the senator's next. He'll clean it up. DC won't let this spread." The square spun, Nia's breath catching as Darius's grip tightened, his face paling as he pulled the radio closer, the agent replaying it, Crane's confession looping in the rain-soaked dark. "Senator?" Darius muttered, his voice low, pulling a tablet from his vest, fingers flying over the screen as he cross-referenced data, his jaw tightening with every swipe. 2 state senators tied to Crane's bribes, campaign funds from shell companies. This isn't local anymore. Nia's mind raced, pieces slamming together. The gas station, the trial, the fire, all threads in a web stretching beyond Hollow Pines, a national beast with claws unseen. Agents murmured, stunned, and Darius barked, "DOJ's launching a probe now." Nia nodded, her grief hardening into resolve as she limped forward, blood dripping from her arm, her good eye locked on Brant's glare through the van's window, his promise of revenge a silent snarl. She'd shattered Hollow Pines, thought. She'd won only to unveil this, a senator's shadow pulling strings from D.C., framing Darius for treason to ground the feds. Her phone buzzed in her torn pocket, a text from an unknown number slicing through the haze. "You're next." The words a chill down her spine, but she pocketed it. Her grin grim and fierce, rain washing her wounds. Agents secured the square, choppers hovering as dawn crept over the horizon, painting the courthouse in pale gold, and Nia spotted a deputy scrambling from the crowd, his uniform muddied, his hand slipping a ledger from Crane's coat as he fled. Toward a side street, its pages glinting in the torchlight. Nia lunged, snatching a pistol from a fallen militia rifle, her burned hands trembling as she sprinted after him, her legs screaming with every step, mud splashing her slacks as she closed. "The gap! Stop!" she rasped, her voice a steel thread, raising the gun as the deputy turned, his face paling. A concealed aide she'd glimpsed in court, his eyes wide with panic. She fired, the shot cracking through the rain, hitting the ledger in his hand. Papers bursting into the mud as he stumbled, clutching his arm where the bullet grazed him. Nia dove, scooping the soaked pages, her good eye scanning the scrawl. Names, dates, payments, a senator's signature tying Crane to D.C., a national conspiracy. Laid bare. She staggered back, rain washing ink from the ledger, and shouted, "Darius, live feed!" Holding it high as a news van's camera zoomed in, her bloodied face filling the frame. The truth streaming to millions before she collapsed, her leg giving out, mud soaking her knees. The aide fired back, a hidden pistol in his sleeve barking, as a bullet tore through Nia's side, blood welling hot under her ribs as she hit the ground, her good eye rolling back, pain a white-hot storm drowning her senses. Darius roared, tackling the aide as agents swarmed, cuffs snapping on his wrists. The ledger clutched in Nia's burned hand as choppers lifted off, their blades a fading hum. Her body trembled, blood pooling in the mud, and she thought of the broadcast, the badge, the quarry. Every fight she'd clawed through, now a fragile victory slipping away. The feds had come, Brant and Crane were caged, but the senator's shot had flipped it all. Her fate, and a deeper war, hanging as she faded, rain washing her wounds, her spirit iron despite the dark. Nia Jackson's harrowing journey through Hollow Pines unveils the brutal reality of systemic racism and the resilience required to confront it. Her story teaches us that injustice isn't a lone act, but a web spun from power, privilege, and silence, thriving where voices are stifled. Nia, a black U.S. attorney, faced a racist judge, a corrupt sheriff, and a town rigged against her, from a gas station slur to a staged lynching, yet she refused to break. Her courage shows that strength isn't just physical, it's the will to fight when every door slams shut, even as betrayal and bullets test her limits. The cost was steep. Marcus's sellout, Lila's peril, her own blood, but it fueled her. Fire, proving one spark, can ignite change against overwhelming odds. Nia's defiance against a racist judge and his cronies exposed not just local corruption, but a national conspiracy, teaching us that vigilance is a lifelong battle, stretching from small towns to D.C.'s shadows. Her truth, broadcast live, shattered. Lies, but only because she wielded it relentlessly, a lesson in persistence over despair. For every Brant or Crane, there's a system propping them up, and dismantling it demands unyielding grit. What would you do if Hollow Pines was your fight? Drop a comment below if you believe one voice can topple a racist machine. Then like, subscribe, and share to spread Nia's stand. Thanks for joining her battle. Stay fierce, stay fearless, and never let injustice win.